Are we live? Now? Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of council on Monday, March the 21st. And welcome back to some normalcy. It's great to see everybody here. So close up, I don't know if it's a little uncomfortable, but it certainly is good to see. So I'll call this meeting to order by resolution, please, Madam Clerk.
It's moved by Councillor Smith, seconded by Councillor McDonald, that the meeting of the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas and Glengarry be hereby called to order.
All in favour of the motion? Thank you, carried. The adoption of the agenda. Are there any additions? Yes, Councillor Gardner.
Thanks, Madam Warden. I was wondering if we could, I don't know where it would fit in, but I know staff have been working on housing. If we could maybe get an update or have a discussion about getting an update, that would be great.
The housing issue, yes, of course. So maybe if it's okay, I think we'll put it under 6.4C, under planning. And if it's okay, Peter, I think you are going to be sitting on some kind of committee with regards to the housing issue. Is that correct? Okay, so we'll put that under 6.4C, housing. Are there any other additions? Okay, can you please read the motion?
It's moved by Councillor Fraser, seconded by Councillor Armstrong, that Council approve the agenda as amended.
All in favour of the motion? Thank you, carried. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? Seeing none, adoption of the minutes for February the 22nd and the 28th.
Moved by Councillor Fraser, seconded by Councillor Smith, that the minutes of the meetings, including the in-camera minutes of the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas and Glengarry, held February 22nd and 28, 2022, be adopted as circulated.
All in favour of the motion? Carried. Thank you. Do we have a delegation? Is our delegation on?
Sorry, is that referring to Glengarry Memorial Hospital?
Yes, Glengarry Memorial.
Sorry. Yes, we are aligned.
Okay. Jamie. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, we have a delegation this morning from it's the Family Physician Recruitment from Glengarry Memorial Hospital, Dr. Kuchipera. Welcome.
Thank you. Is there any capacity to share the presentation from your end, or do you want me to share the screen from my end?
You can share it from your end, please.
Give me one moment. See if we can set that up. Okay. Can everyone see the main page?
Yes, we can see it.
Great, we'll get going. So my name's Nadia Kuchereva. I'm the Chief of Staff at Glengarry Memorial Hospital, and we also have Dr. Lucy Lajoie here today as well. She's the head of the Family Health Organization for the physicians in Moose Creek and Alexandria. And we're here today on behalf of our community and region to talk to you about family physician recruitment. So we definitely need family physicians in our area. Our hospital alone has a 22-bed inpatient unit that requires a physician to service these patients 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And family physicians with on-site practices at our hospital are required to provide hospice coverage on a rotational basis. So without recruitment, our current physicians will be covering our inpatient unit 1 in every 4 weeks, which requires them to close their practice for a week, creating some access issues there, but certainly contributing as well to physician burnout. We typically like to see our rotation to be 1 in every 6 or 1 in every 8 weeks. So we have a few reasons for recruitment that make this a prominent issue now more than previously. One physician did give up their hospital-based practice in 2021, moving their practice to the town of Alexandria and foregoing their requirement to follow inpatients on the regular roster. 2 physicians will also be leaving their family practices and the hospital duties, and they each have a patient volume of about 850 patients. One physician is looking to retire in the next 4 years and looking to reduce their practice this year by 650 patients and have that be on an ongoing basis to prepare for retirement. And we have a physician in Moose Creek who will be leaving, and although no impact directly on the hospital with regards to hospice care, it will impact our community, leaving an additional 830 patients newly orphaned. So these practice changes contribute to a new orphan patient population of about 3,000 patients, in addition to the existing orphan patient group if we don't recruit. Ontario Healthcare Connect is a regional wait list that doctors can pull from, but we haven't had any local doctors pull from that list since our last recruitment in 2018. Based on 2020 data from the Upper Canada, Cornwall and Area Ontario Health Team, and with my discussions with the Nurse Practitioner Clinic Executive Director, we have data that demonstrates that we have about 117,000 attached patients currently in the SDG area. This is served by approximately 50 family physicians. It includes the Cornwall physicians and our nurse practitioner-led clinic, as well as the Anglophone and Francophone community health centers, showing approximately about 1,700 patients per provider. We also, this data also tells us that we have 12,000 unattached patients. Now, with the additional 3,000 that we're foreseeing within the next coming months, we're looking at 15,000 unattached patients. Now, new family physicians tend to roster about 1,000 patients per provider. And as I referred to previously, this actually might be an overestimation, considering that 3 of the practices that are closing were actually under this number. So we therefore need a minimum of 15 family physicians for SDG, and for Glengarry alone, we're hoping that we can recruit 4 in 2022. This is a map from the OHT data from 2020. Each dot represents 10 patients, and it shows the distribution of the unattached patients who are in our catchment. The purple area is essentially the SDG OHT area. So recruitment struggles. Our community has office space for 4 recruits on site at the hospital and 1 recruit in Moose Creek. But like I said previously, we haven't successfully recruited a physician since 2018. We certainly have had interested candidates, but we've lost them primarily to Cornwall and to Ottawa. So large hospitals in the area are providing significant cash-based recruitment incentives that we haven't been able to compete with historically. For example, Cornwall does offer $25,000 per year to medical students for up to 6 years. So $150,000 in financial assistance certainly helps to offset debt load. They also offer $25,000 to new recruits. Larger hospitals and communities offer more work model options and tend to be more lucrative. If you're following more patients in higher acuity, such as in Cornwall, you bill fee for service, so you tend to get paid more, and the hospital on-call stipend, because you're covering more beds, ends up being more money as well. So it's harder to compete with that. Rural areas also provide fewer spousal employment opportunities. 41% of medical students report a debt of $120,000 after medical school, plus an additional $30,000 for the average Canadian undergrad debt. So many graduates from medical school are presenting with a debt load of $150,000. So being able to offset this to allow them to buy a house, start a practice is certainly an important recruitment incentive. So HGMH, Glengarry Memorial Hospital, does offer incentives for family physicians who are also providing hospice work who are on site. Historically, it's been 4 years of free rent, but we will be increasing this to 5 years, which is a $40,000 value for on-site physicians. The other option that we're adding in this year is in lieu of 5 years of free rent, we will also offer the option of $40,000 cash upfront, particularly to offset those with higher debt loads. We're hoping this will be an attractive offer. We will continue our relocation incentive of up to $5,000 if they're moving from more than 1 hour away. And we will continue our on-site office amenities, which include heating, cooling, ventilation, all utilities and electrical, janitorial and maintenance services, office furniture, paper shredding at cost, IT support at cost, medical supplies at cost, plus 10%, and the cafeteria. So our proposal keeps in mind that we are competing with hundreds of underserviced communities. Ideally, recruitment and retention should involve the collaboration between hospitals, physicians, township councils, county council, and the business community. And we are proposing the following contributions per new doctor for a minimum 5-year family practice agreement on top of the incentives offered by Glengarry Memorial Hospital. So to North Glengarry, we asked $5,000 for new recruits in the Alexandria and Moose Creek area. For South Glengarry Township, we asked the same. And to you today, we are asking $5,000 for any physician that would open practice anywhere in SDG. We'd also like to invite members of council to our welcoming committee. This would also include the business community, hospital leadership, fellow physicians to formally welcome new doctors to SDG. A welcoming committee would serve to tour and spoil possible recruits, giving them a gas card to visit, showcase local attractions and restaurants, and a local welcoming gift, and facilitate a meet and greet with key community leaders and hospital members. And with that, I'll open the floor to any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Councillor Gardner has a question. Go ahead.
Thanks, Warden. Thank you for your presentation, Doctor. I'm just wondering, we in South Dundas and South Stormont have had a partnership for about 3 years working to recruit doctors to our area. We've been successful and recruited 2 total at this point. I'm just wondering if the intention of this is to have a broader discussion with all the municipalities. I know you're mentioning that the $5,000 would go towards anywhere in SDG. I'm just wondering how we can connect, because there is some work already being done in the western part of SDG. So I'm just curious if there's a way we can connect so we're not duplicating efforts.
Yeah, there's certainly an appetite for that from our end. I know I reached out actually through the Health Force Ontario ad to try and find a connection there. I did see some local articles over the last year published from that area on this subject, and also tried to reach out through Maryland Crabtree and through Winchester Hospital as well to understand the recruitment incentives there, and have not been very successful in finding someone to connect with. So if you're that person or can help me with that, then I think there certainly is an opportunity to try and align efforts. And would that. So I can certainly maybe through somebody send you my email address or point of contact so where we can connect.
Thanks, Doctor. Myself and Councillor McGillis sit on that committee, so we would definitely love to connect with you. Also, just a quick question about the nurse practitioner clinic. I know that Lancaster has a nurse practitioner clinic. In the West, we have been trying to get a nurse practitioner clinic to ease some of the burden on our family physicians and have run into a substantial roadblock with the province. So I'm just wondering, you know, maybe we can connect offline as well just to see some of the successes with that. Because we do believe, and we have found in our findings, that nurse practitioner clinics are definitely a piece of this puzzle to kind of keep the workload off the family physicians once you are able to attract them.
Absolutely. So Penelope is the executive director there, and I definitely have touched base with her on this. The issue in part is the funding piece. You know, when you're recruiting family physicians, it's from a different funding envelope than for the nurse practitioner-led clinics. And there seems to be some barriers to getting funding for new clinics. I know, speaking with Penelope just a few days ago, there was maybe some leverage for clinic expansion, targeting the request from more that angle, and probably including her in some conversations moving forward would be an asset for regional recruitment as a whole.
Perfect. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, Councillor McGillis and then Councillor Armstrong, please.
Thank you, Madam Warden. I was just going to add to what Councillor Gardner said. You know, we lost six doctors in the western part of the SDG, you know, South Dundas and South Dormont. So that's a great idea, what you said. We'd like to connect through our working group, and then maybe at our next meeting, we could ask you to meet with us, if you will, and you know, have a discussion on how we can make this happen and see what monies are available for us.
That would be great. And I mean, I would love to see Winchester involved as well. I think really having that hospital connection piece is important. And if we can try and create some collaborations there so that it's not kind of penalized if you're going in one area versus another area of SDG, but there's a kind of a collaborative approach to recruiting any physician to the area so that they have choice and feel equally welcomed in all parts. Getting all, I think, stakeholders at the table for a discussion like that would offer some real benefit.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Armstrong, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Warden. Thank you very much for the presentation. I don't actually have much of a question, just a couple of comments. It's great to see this conversation going on. I would add to Winchester, I don't know if he would be available or not, but I think if the hospital does start to have conversations with you folks, somebody else who just happens to be both the mayor and my doctor, but Dr. Bart Steele in Winchester, through our recruitment problems, although he's not associated with the hospital, was one of the most successful people in all of our areas on his own for recruitment. So I think that's a great resource for his brain to pick if he would be willing to join the conversation. This is certainly long coming. I mean, you know, if we were to be successful and have even the county's portion have $5,000 for every doctor, if we were to get 6 doctors, it'd be one in each township would be the best $30,000 we've spent, at least at my time in this table. Not that that's that long. I think it's certainly successful. One disappointing thing, and I don't mean disappointing to you, Doctor, or anybody who's been involved in this, is that the $40,000 figure is the same figure that we had 16 years ago when we were trying to recruit doctors in North Dundas, and we weren't overly successful. And I'm not scoffing at $40,000, but it's just sad to see that we're still at that number. And certainly our involvement could at least bounce that number up. I mean, again, you know, we failed at many doctors, and we had the proximity to Ottawa. You know, some sort of, and there's great things in Glengarry that can draw people, but the $40,000 felt like a dud. I mean, Ottawa was offering 60 at the time, and the North was offering, and rightly so, but they were offering ridiculous amounts of money. So anything that can add to that $40,000 would be great, and I certainly think that the county should help with some leadership with this request.
Thank
Yes,
you,
from
Councillor.
our, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, from the hospital perspective, we're hoping that in addition to the 40 plus the 15 from each of North Glengarry, South Glengarry, and SDG, and then possibly a 5 for moving, that would bring us up to 60,000. And then the hospital itself is also looking at, in addition to that, if we can, even adding a little bit more into the pot if possible. So I agree 40 on its own isn't enough. And so any physician who would be recruited who wouldn't be attached to a hospital, this is where it could become less enticing. And this is where maybe Winchester too, you know, if we recruit somebody, for example, to Moose Creek, depending on if they're located closer to Ottawa, they might prefer Winchester as a hospital. And so $15,000 for recruitment may really not be sufficient to draw them in. And this is where I think that collaboration piece might make a difference moving forward as well.
Okay, Councillor Jaworski, go ahead.
Thank you, through your warden. Thank you, Dr. Kucherepa, for your presentation. I'll probably make just a few comments, not questions, and I'm very happy to follow Councillor Armstrong because I think he raises a lot of important points about how important this is. I sort of liken this to the OPP crisis response team, and this is something that we can do to really impact the lives of our residents long term, because I mean, as we know, if we don't get timely health advice, the impacts on our lives and the cost to the system just increases dramatically. So this is, you know, smaller investments that can have really snowballing effects. So I think it's very important, and I think aiming big is what we need to do if we want to have an impact versus what some of the larger centers are doing. So just a few personal comments, because I don't know if the folks in South Glengarry know this, but so my mom is a physician in Hawkesbury. She's a specialist, but she's been working for almost 40 years now there, and although she doesn't have plans to retire, she probably would have retired if she could have found, if she'd been successful in finding someone to take over a practice. She hasn't had a lot of success in that. And one of the big issues for her, you know, she's found some interested candidates, but a lot of times the stumbling block is the opportunities for the physician's spouse to find work. A lot of times because, you know, if they're not, medical doctors are in school much longer, and so oftentimes the spouse is working in the, you know, already while they're still in school, and so their career is more established. So it's a lot harder to get them to move. And so if we can be creative, if people have, you know, creative ideas on how to help getting those spouses to be comfortable in the idea also of moving to rural areas, helping, you know, getting them on board to all the great things that we have to offer, because we really do have a lot of great things to offer in rural areas versus urban areas. So that's one comment I wanted to make. And then the other comment is I think you're really underselling yourselves in terms of the value of the office space in the hospital. I did some quick math on what my mom is paying. She has a big office, you know, she has many examining rooms, but she's paying more than 3 times what you guys are putting in terms of your value. So I think, you know, even though that's, you know, maybe that's not cash to the person, I think in terms of valuing that, what you're offering them, I think you should double check. So my mom is at the Trillium, which is owned by the hospital. So, you know, maybe do a little look at how you compare to those, because I think you can up the value there. So thank you very much.
Appreciate that.
Okay, Councillor McGillis, go ahead.
Thank you again, Madam Warden. I'm just thinking with what they were asking for is 5,000 from each municipality and 5,000 for the counties for the next 5 years. Is that correct?
Not entirely. So 5,000 per new recruit in an exchange for a 5-year return of service.
Okay.
So not that the program would only last 5 years. I'm hoping it would be ongoing, but that the return of service would be minimum 5 years from the candidate.
Okay. Can I have
Yes, go ahead.
subsequent? Thank you. Just maybe the county, how much money do we have in reserves for the pandemic fund? Because we have money left over too at our municipality. So I'm just wondering if we could allocate towards that. Yeah, Rebecca? I was just wondering how much money we have in reserves from the COVID funding that we received over the past 2.5 years.
So the treasurer said 1.2 million.
So maybe we could use that for some funding towards this initiative, is what I'm thinking.
She's shaking her head. No, they can't hear you. If you could please go to the microphone. Thank you.
There.
Thank you.
So the COVID funding, we're not able to provide funding to other external parties with the COVID funding. The only thing that we could do is pay for it internally or something internally for the county purpose. We can't provide that funding to any other party, not even to other municipalities.
Okay, thank you for that. Rebecca? Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. I think we'll ask our CAO to come back to council with a report on this subject, and then you'll be hearing from us, Doctor.
Thank you, Councillors.
Thank you very much. Okay, CAO, Simpson, that's fine. You'll
Yes,
do a
absolutely.
report for
Yes,
us?
thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving right along. Point 6, action requests, corporate services. Madam Clerk, if you could please read the 3 resolutions.
Yes, through you, Madam Warden, for the Educational Equity Next Steps report, there are 3 associated resolutions that we'll vote on after the discussion. The first one will be moved by Councillor McDonald, seconded by Councillor Gardner, and it reads that the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry endorse the engagement of Dr. Paul Bennett of Schoolhouse Consulting to work with the Education Working Group on the development of a variety of tools, including an action plan to implement the county's educational priorities and mitigate future school closures, as well as other related work to an upset amount of $20,000, said funds to be drawn from the working reserve. The second resolution will be moved by Councillor Smith, seconded by Councillor Armstrong, and reads that staff be directed to bring forward the necessary terms of reference, etc., to formalize the Education Working Group as a standing committee of County Council pursuant to the procedure bylaw. And the third resolution will be moved by Councillor Gardner, seconded by Councillor Armstrong, and reads that the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry ask that the Upper Canada District School Board pause the impending closure of North Stormont Public School at the end of this school year and review the decision for permanent closure and authorize the warden to forward a letter to the Upper Canada District School Board communicating the same.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Tim, go ahead.
Good morning, Council. Thank you, Madam Warden. It's good sitting here actually and looking out at everybody here. So it's been a while. So thank you for that. As the clerk read out, there's 3 prongs of this report, 3 recommendations, and the working group has been very busy working away on these different things coming out of the symposium and things like that. So the first one is providing some funds to work with Dr. Paul Bennett of the Schoolhouse Consulting Group. He's an expert in the educational field. We met him as he was the keynote speaker during our symposium. We were quite impressed with his knowledge and his experience. So what we'd like to do is, he's given us a proposal. As I said, the $20,000 is an upset. We're only looking at $5,000 or $6,000 at this point, but I thought, having an envelope that we can use for one-offs is smart. We can easily take those monies from the working reserve. So if we get green lighted today, I'm going to contact him, and he's going to get working on an action plan, a very succinct, a very crisp action plan to implement what our priorities are per council's decision. And we also spoke at length about the existing moratorium on school closures, which we believe may be lifted later this year, sometime after the election, regardless of who forms the next government. So our plan is to try to get ahead of that. So he's going to work with us developing some strategies around what we believe is coming. And just as a related kind of sidebar, we haven't heard yet, but we've asked for a delegation at OGRA, which is coming up in a few weeks, to talk to the minister specifically about the plans around the moratorium and how that's going to I don't know if we're going to get an answer, but we're going to ask, and that might help inform where we go with that. So that's the first recommendation. The second one is the working group, which is composed of lay members and elected officials, county councillors and local councillors, 3 of whom members are here today. They'd like to formalize that group into a standing committee under the terms of under the procedure bylaw. So there'd be a terms of reference a budget and things like that. They feel that, and I agree that this is an issue that's of such magnitude that if we have a standing committee, it's going to help us continuity and moving forward with it. So if council's okay with that, at the next meeting, I'll bring forward the documentation that's required to make that happen. And the third part of it, we had a lengthy discussion, and I'm looking to Councillor Wirt or Laundrie if they want to chime in. We had a lengthy discussion at our last meeting about North Stormont Public School and the fact that it's going to be closing at the end of the year, and how that doesn't make sense for the kids in that area, especially given the huge growth that's happening in Moose Creek and Chrysler. So what we'd like to do is have the warden send a letter just saying, put a pause on it, take a hard look at it before you do it, and see where that goes. So in a nutshell, I don't know if Councillor Gardner, who's the chair of the committee, or Councillor Jaworski, or the warden, Councillor Fraser, part of the group, if you have any more comments on it. But we'd like to, we've got a lot of balls in the air, and we want to keep the momentum going and keep pushing on this, because it's very important. And I know the warden, when she gives her update, we had a lengthy discussion about this as well at the Warden's Caucus meeting last Friday? No, 2 Fridays ago. So, thank you.
Thank you for your report. I think what we'll do is we'll divide this in 3, and we'll start with the first recommendation, which is the question of hiring Dr. Paul Bennett for the amount of $20,000 that would be drawn from the working reserve. So, comments or questions, please. Go ahead, Councillor Jaworski.
Well, clearly, as part of the working group, I support this concept. And just to build a bit on what our CAO has already mentioned, I think we've done a lot of great work. We have a lot of momentum, but it is something that takes a lot of resources, and it does require a very, a skill set that's pretty unique, expertise that's unique, and we're very fortunate that Dr. Paul Bennett has that skill set and that expertise. And I think that working with him will help us be as efficient and as productive as possible. I'm not saying that maybe, if we didn't have him, that we would eventually get there, but I think we need to capitalize on the momentum and the speed with which they're moving, and he'll help us just be that much more efficient and that much more productive. So I think we're very fortunate that he is interested in working with us. So.
Agreed. Councillor Gardner, do you have any comments?
Sure. The CAO gave a great update. We have been working hard, and Dr. Bennett is somebody who has gone down this path before. So if we look at efficiency, definitely an efficient opportunity to hire somebody that is not going to spin wheels, if you will, has kind of a plan in mind, and will give us that, as the CAO has said, that crisp timeline and proposal. And actually, it's an action plan, right? We're in the action stages of the discussion. We've done the backgrounder and the engagement piece, and now we're ready for action. So definitely think it's great. And he's, the amount is not huge for something that's so all-encompassing. So I obviously agree with it. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. If there are no other questions or comments, then I'll call a vote on the first recommendation. All in favor? Carried, none opposed. So question number 2 is to formalize the Education Working Group as a standing committee of County Council. Are there any comments? Yes, Councillor Gardner.
We've had this discussion around our committee table, and as Councillor Jaworski has said, there's been a lot of work done, but we also want consistency, regardless on who's sitting around this table. I think that our residents have highlighted the importance of the education discussion. I think it should be an ongoing discussion, and as if we're successful in having rural education looked at and be brought up to equity, we would hope to carry on the discussion and perhaps have ongoing dialogue with the province as to what that may or may not look like. So I think it's important just to have that security in having a somewhat permanent committee.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. Councillor Jaworski.
just to build on that, I'd like also to comment that I think I don't mean the specific individual members of the committee, but I think overall sort of the makeup of the committee has been a very effective one, in that we have municipal lower tier councillors as well as upper tier councillors, as well as some lay people with some very specific expertise. I think that that's allowed us to really draw on the expertise and the knowledge and the experience of the folks that we need at the table. Whereas if it's more traditional in that it's only county councillors, you don't necessarily have that same level of understanding of the situation. I mean, I guess I'm kind of an example of that, in that I've, because of strange circumstances, I'm very fortunate that I've been able to been on both sides of that. But had it not been, and I'd still be but if I'd been remaining as a township councillor, I see that Jennifer McIsaac also is an excellent example of that. Someone who has had really deep experience and long-term experience, longer than I have, on this file. So someone whose voice I think is important, or someone like that whose voice is important to keep in the conversation.
Okay, well, that can be taken into account when structuring this committee, providing council agrees with that. Are there any other comments? Otherwise, I will call the vote on that. Okay, all in favor of a standing committee? All carried. Thank you very much. And then the final one is making a request of the Upper Canada District School Board to pause the impending closure of North Stormont Public School pending some more research. Comments or questions on that, please? Everyone thinks it's a good idea. All in favor of the motion? Carried, none opposed. Thank you very much. Moving right along to planning, 6.4. Madam Clerk, if you could please put the request to initiate an official plan amendment, delegation of authority for mining zoning amendments on the table.
It's moved by Councillor MacDonald, seconded by Councillor Smith, that the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas and Glengarry direct staff to initiate an official plan amendment to allow for delegation of authority for minor zoning amendments, including the potential for changing consultation requirements.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Peter.
I just have a short presentation just to give council an overview. Okay. Thank you, Warden and Council. So the report today is about delegation of authority for minor zoning amendments. This is a new power that the province has just given municipalities, local municipalities, the opportunity to take advantage of in order to reduce the timelines for development applications. So I'll just give an overview of what this is about. So as council knows, both at the county and the local level, many planning approvals do require a bylaw of council. Official plan amendments, we have one later in the meeting. Zoning bylaw amendments, part lot control to separate semi-detached, and site plan and subdivision agreements unless that's been delegated to staff. Bill 13 was passed last year and is now in effect. So what the province put forward is that the council of a local municipality, so not the county, would be at the township level, may by bylaw delegate authority to pass bylaws under section 34, which is for zoning, to a committee of council or an officer, employee, or agent. In order to do that, you can see there's an official plan requirement, so the municipality, or in our case the county, would need a policy saying what can be delegated in its official plan. Some of the examples that they give in here include a bylaw to remove a holding symbol, which is usually used to allow subdivision development once all the agreements are signed, and temporary land uses. There can be conditions in terms of who can sign it, maybe if it's opposed or not opposed, if it has to go back to council, and it can also be withdrawn. It doesn't alter any notice or public meeting requirements or appeal rights. People still have the right to appeal if some of this is delegated to staff, but municipalities can alter public notice provisions in their official plan if desired for less intensive development or to increase requirements for consultation. There's a lot of decisions that are already delegated through the Planning Act, including plan of subdivision, condominium, consents, site plans, and some of the SDG municipalities' validations. One that we've talked about with the SDG planners is the part lot control. Typically that's used to split two halves of a semi-detached or split up a townhome block. It allows a faster process, it's already gone through subdivision, to potentially divide the land. That's another opportunity for delegation, just to speed it up by probably several weeks to a month for every application to allow developments to move forward. So in terms of if council's interested in looking at this option, we did consult with the SDG clerks of all the municipalities and with the planners as well. So what we talked about is we thought that the best use of this tool would probably be for surplus zoning amendments. I'm sure you've all seen at your local level, you have the farmland that's severed, or the house severed off from the farmland. They have to rezone the retained. No one shows up to the public meeting, and it goes, there's appeal period after that. So I think, based on all the discussion that we had as a group, and if it's the will of the county and ultimately it would be the local councils to decide if they want to use that power or not, it's an ideal candidate for delegation. It's already gone through that severance review process. The rules are in the provincial policy statement, and they're fairly straightforward applications. Garden suites, that's not everyone uses that. Yeah, that's usually temporary housing on a farm. That once in a while gets brought forward, but a couple of the municipalities that use them more thought that they might use that power to delegate that, again, just to speed up the process so people can get their building permits, and instead of waiting till the next council date, which in the summer can sometimes be a little while. We talked about a temporary use bylaw, so example like a chip stand in a park, something like that, but with all the discussion, we felt it could be up to the local municipality, but that's kind of a decision that we'd probably recommend council make rather than staff in terms of a temporary use, because we might think it's fine, they get circulated, and council might have a better sense of their position on that. The lifting of a holding symbol, that's another one that comes to your councils regularly. If you have a subdivision, the agreement's signed, the services are in, they want to get building permits. So one of the ideas was that could be delegated upon approval of the subdivision agreement. Usually your subdivision agreement's already going to council, so if this would move forward, then once the agreement's signed, then the staff in them could sign the bylaw as well. Part lot control is already allowed to be delegated, and it's not part of this particular request, but it's one that we, as a group of the planners and planning staff in the area, we felt that was one, again, that might be a good category to speed up the process, because it could go from basically a month or two to a couple of days if everything's kind of lined up. The next question I had on the presentation is who should be delegated this authority? So that was definitely something that we talked about with the local clerks, because they're usually signing all the bylaws with the mayor, and they felt that, and we felt as planners too, that kind of made sense to keep that consistent. So have the mayor and the clerk sign off on these as upon recommendation to the planning department. So the example again was the surplus dwelling. They've already got their severance approval. They just need one of their conditions is to get the land rezoned. This would be one of the authorities that the mayor and clerk could sign, rather than having to wait the time for the next council agenda. What to do if there's objections was one of the concerns, and I think around the table we felt that if there's a contested application, then that should just get bumped up to council. So the intention of delegating this power is only for straightforward applications, so any kind of contentious zoning application, that's council's decision, not staff. Another question is, how do we maintain transparency and accountability? So usually you'd always see these on your agenda coming forward and have a chance to decide or for or against. I know just talking with some of our municipalities, doing the annual or quarterly reports or council circulation of public notices is a way to do it. I know in South Dormont and South Glengarry with the severances, even though that's delegated to staff, the information still comes on the council agenda that there was a severance approved at this date or that date, so council is still aware. So that would be a decision of the local municipality in terms of how to have that accountability, but those are a couple of suggestions there. So the next steps for this would be, if council endorses this, we would start the official plan amendment process. We would circulate the draft policies to our clerks and planners around the table and make sure everyone's okay with the overall structure. The official plan amendment would go back to County Council for final endorsement, and then each local municipality would be able to decide if they wanted to use this power or not. So it doesn't, we don't have to use it, but this amendment would allow the option to use it if the municipalities chose. So that's my presentation, and also I know one of the points that had been raised prior to the meeting is whether we should look at all the surplus dwelling policies at the same time, since this is the main use that for these delegation is to look at surplus dwelling rezoning. So if that's council's wish, we could also add that to the resolution as well, in terms of looking at the policy before this gets delegated to staff to review those policies. So that's an option as well.
Thank you very much for that report. Peter and I had a lengthy discussion on Friday on this subject there, because there are some real opportunities to reduce red tape and shorten timelines on some of these decisions, but there are also some very real potential pitfalls, transparency being one of them, but Peter assured me that there are ways to deal with this. But also, you know, you think that a subject isn't going to be prickly, and sure enough, it turns out to be prickly, and council then is left sort of potentially unaware of a situation. So I think it bears some detailed sort of policy considerations if County Council decides to go ahead with this. Obviously, the lower tiers are the ones that are going to be, if delegation of authority is considered here, that'll be in their decision-making process. But I think if we can, provide some solid policy recommendations, that would be desirable. I also brought up with Peter the issue of lot sizes on. What did you call it, Peter?
Surplus farm dwellings.
Surplus farm dwellings. In North Glengarry, it's been an issue in terms of, lot sizes, in some cases being very, very small and not making the properties as desirable as a result. So Peter did say that there has been a little bit of a shift in the possibility of some opening that up a little bit if possible. So I think that would be good if that was considered at the same time, if council agrees. So please go ahead, Councillor McGillis, you had something.
Madam Warden, through you, I just was going to reiterate some of the things that you just said, because I think it's very important that it's always a good thing to streamline through a lot of the red tape that we are experiencing and we have experienced from the past from the province for these type of applications, as long as it's done correctly, as you say. It'll be a faster process for municipalities that are experiencing a lot of growth. Being bogged down is not helping us, and I know there's, especially for municipalities that that are seeing files being backlogged because of slow permitting and things like that. So this might speed it up. I think it's something that we should really consider. I think it's important that that we look at you know, trying to relieve some of the pressure at the county level too. Let the municipalities make decisions, and I'm sure they're quite qualified to do so. So I think that I wouldn't be too concerned about transparency. I think it would be done right, as long as, again, if we all work together and making sure that the everything's done and everybody agrees through the communications that we're going to all do it the same. Is that something that you consider?
Thank you for that, yep. Okay, Councillor Landry and then Councillor Warden.
Thank you, Madam Warden. Peter, so in regards to, like, I fully agree, comments that were made. So with subdivision, generally, you're coming down to the last hour. You get a builder that's trying to get a house in the ground, applying for a building permit, and the red tape with aspect of getting the H or so on off for zoning, like 1 week turns into a month, just like that, and it just frustrates everybody. And I'm in the field where I hear a lot about it. So in regards to removing the H, which I understand if it's in the process of we're approving a subdivision, which can tail end with it, but as far as lifting reserves, so often if you're in a second phase, you've got roads coming in that reserves were implemented. Is it just an easy transfer, lifting a reserve to as a public road, or is that again another process that maybe could be tied into being sequence in with removing the H, lifting the reserves, because I mean your road is just opening up to the new road that's being built, or is that just a simple transfer as far as removing the reserves? So maybe you could add to that.
That's a great question, Councillor Landry, and in some cases there needs to be a bylaw, but again, what we looked at this is that Municipal Act does allow delegation of bylaws, so that maybe we could expand that as well to other types of bylaws through the subdivision process. And as you mentioned, the holding one is one that if someone's building permits, everything's in, they're all ready to go. Sometimes they still have to wait 3 weeks till a council meeting, and they've already lined up all their contractors. So I think at least the holding, that would definitely speed things up. But we can take a look at some of the other bylaws throughout the process as well.
Okay, Councillor Warden and then Councillor Jaworski.
Through you, Madam Warden. Thanks for the presentation, Peter. I think there's a lot of merit to this. I think that if it's done properly, we can keep the transparency in check and speed up the process. In South Glengarry a few years ago, I don't know exactly what we did away with, but I think it was the Planning Advisory Committee. It's gone now, and it was just one level of time where it just goes to the planner and then comes to council as for information purposes. And I think it saved on average 3 to 4 weeks per application. So I think there's probably more room in some areas that we could do the same. So I certainly am in favor of examining, going through this and moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you, through you, Madam Warden. I think what's most interesting for me on this one is that, you know, it's about giving a certain level of local control if they want to have it in terms of delegating or not delegating. I don't think that every township has to do this the same way for it to be done well. I think the points about transparency that's very important. The point about consultation when the public does have comment, the idea of when something is contested, that it be bumped up to council. I think those are really solid recommendations. But I think, I mean, I know there are certain, you know, I'm still new to this, and I know there's certain files that come to us, and I'm still sort of like, and why is this coming to us? Because we can't really make any, you know, change to this. So it feels sort of, you know, it's rubber stamping. And the issue of time for the developer or the homeowner, that's definitely probably should be our main focus, but there's also the issue of workload on our staff. I mean, preparing, having that in council agendas, that adds a lot of time to, you know, our relatively small staffs that are involved in this work. And I think anything that we can do to make them more effective, also comes back to saving money for all the ratepayers within our municipalities, is just making those, those groups more efficient. So I think allowing the lower tiers to adapt the process to what makes most sense for them, I think that's definitely something that we should do. And the idea of providing guidance on how we think, best practices, I think that's important. But I don't think it has to be the same from one township to another, because everyone's got slightly different context. Last comment, though, in terms of the surplus dwelling, I'd be very interested to understand, if that can be looked at, because if it can be more flexible, I do agree that sometimes some of those lots that are created do seem they're less desirable. So if there is some flexibility there, I think that would be another nice tool for the local municipalities to have to try and, increase, the economic development potential in these cases. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other comments? Okay, take a vote. All in favor of them? Oh, sorry.
Through you, Madam Warden, Peter prepared an amendment to add the surplus dwellings.
Okay,
If
thank
you'd
you.
like me to read it, it will require a mover and seconder. The amendment would be that the main motion be amended by adding, and further, that the official plan amendment shall also include a review of policies governing severances of surplus farm dwellings, including lot sizes and permitted accessory uses.
Good. Okay, so that's been added to the motion.
Do we have
heard-
a mover and seconder? Sorry for
Yep.
that. Okay, for the amendment.
Okay, moved by
Perfect.
Councillor Warden and Councillor Jaworski, seconds. Okay, any other comments? All in favor of the motion? Carried, none opposed. Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter. We're on to 6.4B, which is SDG development charges, background study contract. Go ahead, Madam Clerk.
It's moved by Councillor Wirt, seconded by Councillor Jaworski, that the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry award the contract for the SDG Development Charges Background Study to Watson and Associates Economists Limited for the amount of $49,950 plus HST.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Warden and Council. So this project was in the 2022 budget to look at development charges. Development charges are used by municipalities across Ontario, probably about 80% in the 10 to 20,000 range, and increasingly at the county level as well. They are a tool used to ensure that growth pays for growth, and that needs from new infrastructure that's related to growth. Some of that cost comes from new development rather than all being paid by the existing tax base. So it does help to keep the property taxes lower. In terms of at the county level, the primary department that would benefit is transportation, since they do have a large capital budget, and this is for capital costs only, not for operating costs. But there's also POA and library services that could also benefit, again, only in relation to growth-related costs, so not for day-to-day operations. So we did include this in the 2022 budget, and I noted also our neighbors to the north have also included that in their budget. So we're recommending Council award the contract to Watson Associates. They do development charges all over Ontario. They're doing 3 right now in SDG, and also they did the City of Cornwall's as well. And we have a draft work plan that could be modified at Council's direction as well, but currently it'd be planned for implementation in 2023. Again, in the financial analysis and the local municipal impact part of the report, we do note that the same company is doing our growth study, so it can coordinate with some of the needed infrastructure improvements along the county roads or in relation to things like library services. And as these are potentially rolled out long term, it'll help to reduce the pressure on property taxes for both residential and commercial and industrial uses. So we're recommending Council award the contract and get the process started for the development charges study.
Thank you very much for your report. Comments or questions? Councillor Landry.
Through you, Madam Chair. So, Peter, when they identify, so I understand the cost that you're trying to recover from development and to implement these charges. There's two scenarios. So you have one municipality that builds 500 houses. They're rolling along. They implement these fees. There's the other municipality that's trying to attract developers to basically get off the ground and get running. So there's two sides. Do they analyze just this is what you should be doing and putting in prices for what it's worth? Or do they also look at the implication of balancing and helping out a smaller rural municipality that's, because it's one thing, if you're not getting the developers, you're trying to attract developers into your communities, you're trying to build, then you turn around and you say, okay, well, you're looking at this. I understand that they would be paying these fees elsewhere, but at the same time, maybe that's why they're elsewhere. So it's just to maybe see if they can work at both ends of the spectrum. Thanks.
And that's a great question, Councillor Landry. So I've worked with Watson before, and I know they're doing 2 projects. They did a recent presentation at South Dormont as well that I had watched. So the consultants will have a comparator, so you can see how you compare to some of the other municipalities that are out there. They'll also compare it with, in some cases, water sewer charges. So I think it's important to see the whole package, anything at the local level, anything at the county level, and make sure that's competitive. So the municipality doesn't have to charge. The study could say you have to charge 10,000 a unit, but council could say, no, we're not going to charge that much. That's not competitive with our neighbors. Let's put a little lower. Or let's say it was 5,000, but this is something new. Let's phase it in. You could do 1,000 in 2023, 2,000 the next year. So there's definitely options. Council doesn't have to go with the consultant's recommendation for the maximum. There's also exemptions in the bylaw too. So some municipalities end up exempting industrial development in some cases, or I know affordable housing is one of the nonprofit housing. There's some statutory exemptions as well. And then things like churches or farm buildings are exempted by some municipalities as well. So just to summarize, County Council does not have to take the highest number and go for that. You could decide what's right for our community.
Thank you for that. And that's an excellent point, because we have a developer looking at North Glengarry. The very first question was, do you have development charges? Councillor Jaworski, go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Madam Warden. So one thing I'm still trying to understand as a councillor, that balance of what is the cost to provide services to what they bring back in terms of property taxes. And I think sometimes, we sort of make the assumption, well, of course, development is the right way to do it, and it's in the end, it's the right thing. But I find sometimes the data around that is a bit murky. So is that part of this process, is that it's going to try and put a much finer point on that, trying to understand what are the costs incurred to provide services to these new developments? Thanks.
Yes, through the warden, one of the challenges and one of the main parts of the study is to determine what is a growth-related cost versus just something that should be paid through regular property taxes. So for every project, you would see a percentage. Is this project needed because of growth, or just kind of background repair and reconstruction? So development charges aren't intended for things that are just regular maintenance, definitely. But for example, if over time a certain intersection needed a traffic light, maybe let's say 30% of that cost might be just from the growth in the community. Maybe 70% is just the intersection kind of background growth and what's a standard. So for all those projects, that can all be that's all determined through the study, and then at the end, council can make adjustments to that as well. But it is that's a big part of the study, is determining what projects are growth related and what projects are just standard maintenance, replacement, and repair.
Councillor Armstrong, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of things, because we just went through it, and we were one of the first to implement development charges almost 20 years ago. And the same questions that you folks are asking today were the same questions that went around the table, and it wasn't done lightly. I can tell you anecdotally, at least, what turned out to be the reality for North Dundas is that the fact that we had development charges were not the deterrents to developers. It was ancillary things such as water, hospitals, food shopping, restaurants, schools, those sort of things, because most developers are used to development charges if they're placed in the right sort of category. So while we thought, and people told us that in neighboring communities, mostly to the west, told us that you'll never build another building, you'll never get this, you'll never get that. Our growth at that time was never challenged. Yeah, development charges were a non-issue. Speaking specifically, it's just for people that don't have them from the fire services part, I'm not sure that we would have been able to buy the vehicles that we bought without development charges. And they were you truly had to prove that it was because of growth, not just because your truck got old. Uniforms, we had to increase the size of our fire department, so they are quite popular. I mean, I was always on the fence about them. I'm on the fence about the way that we have 60 days once they give you your presentation to decide what numbers you're going to have. You can have further discussions as council. They will come in with the maximum number that you can charge, which is, again, and I'm not speaking for the mayor and I'm not speaking for North Dundas, but to me it's an ungodly number that you see, where you would get effects that I don't think developers might move to somewhere else, but you don't have to take that number. And the input is from your staff, and in my case for the fire department, the input was from me for fire, what would be growth related. So you do have a strong hand, and you should make sure if you do approach this, again, it's not a lecture, but it's sort of from trial and making mistakes, but when you get your opportunity to speak with the consultants, make sure that your staff speaks with them and that you have your mayors and deputy mayors speak with them and truly give the honest input as to what it can be, because then they'll give you the best overall document that they can. Directly to your question, Councillor Laundrie, about will they show you the difference between people that do and don't have them? You don't get that. They compare them to other places that have development charges. So that you have to do your own homework on. And then it's just how you feel as a council, whether or not you think you should. Nothing really bad has happened in North Dundas for having development charges. Could we have lost some things? Quite possibly. I don't know of any that I could point out to you. They may have just not come because of development charges, but as far as our growth-related monies that were spent or recovered, it's been sort of static the whole way until this unprecedented time that we're all sort of dealing with, But I mean, they're not the demon, but they're also not the catch-all. You have to apply what you think is the right number. I mean, I think the presentation was great from this company. They were great to work with, but you have to be prepared. They'll give you numbers, but you have to be prepared with your thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fraser.
Yes, and just to piggyback onto the Councillor Armstrong's thoughts and comments, whenever we look at our budget and the breakdown where funds come from, and you look at the column that talks about from development charges, that clearly brings it together. The benefit of having the development charge when you increase your parks, or as Councillor Armstrong talks about the need for larger pieces of firefighting equipment, play structures, again I go back to parks, the damage done to roads caused by commuter traffic, and you want to upgrade a road, not repair a road, but upgrade from a double surface treatment, or from a gravel to double, or from double to an asphalt. Those things fall into place. Added vehicles because you had hired more staff because you have more parks. If you look at the budget in North Dundas, you'll see the column and you'll see the dollar figures that are there. And now to Councillor Armstrong's comment, nothing negative has come out of it. It's just been positive and relief to the taxpayer. You know, the long-standing taxpayer that's been in the community for 30, 40, 50 or more years isn't paying for the expansion of a park that was caused by development, that's supported by development. So it's in my mind nothing but a benefit to look hard and consider well the options in front of you. Thank you, thank you, Madam Warden.
Okay, thank you for the discussion. If there's nothing further, you've heard the motion. All in favor? Carried, none opposed. Okay, so Peter, sorry about this. We're going to put you on the spot a little bit. 64C is just a little question on affordable housing. We've got a crisis going on here in SDG across Ontario, really. So Councillor Gardner had a question for you.
Thanks, Warden Williams. Yeah, I recognize that housing, affordable housing, at each of our councils, we've had conversations. We've had conversations here. I'm just wondering if there's an update on what we're doing to kind of move this forward. There's been two well-written editorials about what the counties is doing or not doing, and I think it'd be prudent to just maybe have a mini discussion with perhaps just staff giving us some sort of update on as to where we are looking into that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gardner. Is either Tim or Peter?
I can definitely start, Warden, and pass it off to Tim after that. So it is, as Council knows, it is housing's responsibility of the City of Cornwall through the Joint Service Manager, and we do pay about $1.8 million in 2022 towards housing services. I know that the CAO and the Service Manager have been reaching out to our CAO and the township CAOs as well, and to start an affordable housing working group. And Tim may have a more recent update, but I know there was a discussion on first they were going to meet with House of Lazarus and some of the various partners, and then come to the county and the municipalities with project ideas. At the county level, just because it's the city's certain things in social housing are the city's responsibility doesn't mean that the county can't also contribute or go above and beyond as well. So one aspect is, and that came from both the Dundas Housing Committee and also from the city, is updating our zoning bylaws to allow for affordable housing and make it a little bit easier. So we did receive a grant at the last county council meeting for $120,000 to update local zoning bylaws, and that's one of the I'm just working on the RFP with all your township staff, and that was one of the ones that key parts of that recommendation: make it easier for people to build affordable housing, and especially housing types that a lot of times we just have in our bylaws R1 or RS1, and the whole town is zoned low density, but making sure that at each of your councils you've identified sites for higher density housing. The City of Cornwall, the service manager, also attended our most recent group with all the township planners and EDOs, and that was one of the points that she brought as well, Ms. Morgan, to the table, is that that would definitely help them bring projects to the county versus, the city. A lot of them are already serviced and they have the zoning in place, but the service manager suggested that was one of the options we can take. One other one I know is the affordable housing CIP. We did council passed a resolution on that. That seems to be still stuck at the provincial level, so we're hoping that was one of our recommendations from the Dundas Affordable Housing Committee as well, but unfortunately that hasn't gone anywhere since we've been following up and haven't heard anything there. But in terms of the city's actions, Tim might have something to add to that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Madam Warden. Yes, I certainly echo what Peter said. There's lots of things going on behind the scenes. Ms. Morgan did reach out to me in January to gauge interest in terms of our participation in the committee that Peter mentioned, and I said absolutely yes. I haven't heard back from her, so I'm anxiously waiting to hear back from her in terms of what our role is going to be in that. Certainly there's been a lot of discussion, and the warden can probably, the Warden's Caucus about affordable housing and the priority that they've reaffirmed that priority for going forward for this year very strongly. So, that's something that might be able to the concrete actions that come out of that group might help inform kind of where we go locally, because that's just east. I mean, we're regional, but the Warden's Caucus is Eastern Ontario, so they've said absolutely affordable housing is a priority for that group. So that certainly will help us. So just just waiting to be part of that group and drive forward. In addition to those other elements that Peter, I'd kind of the CIP thing had kind of gone out of my mind, but hopefully maybe we can put a little poke into the province because that's been 6-8 months now, I think. We've been waiting on them.
Yes, since November, but before that we had the delegation before that as well. With
so that would help. That would reduce the red tape around getting these things up and going. So certainly, once I hear from the city and that group gets rolling, we can report to council in terms of where it's going. But it's definitely an issue everywhere, as we all know.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Gardner.
I just wanted to say thank you. I you know, and oftentimes there's so much work being done behind the scenes that folks aren't aware of. The only thing around this discussion would be interesting in your discussions if we can come up with, because it's a crisis, sometimes it's necessary to come up with a ready-made solution just to move it forward. So that would be my only comment is oftentimes folks that are being evicted or whatever, they may recognize that they appreciate the work that we're doing, but that doesn't help them find a place to live. So we need to maybe treat this as urgent and see if there's something that can be done in the counties at some point that's relevant to people looking for a place to live. So, thank you.
Councillor Armstrong, go ahead.
Thank you, Warden. Just one comment, and I don't know how we ever get around that, but is the good work that's being done certainly towards affordable housing, but there always tends to be, or not always, I shouldn't be in generalities, but there does tend to be, at least in my scope, you run into, when you're dealing with the public and trying to talk about how you're addressing this problem, they get the confluence of affordable housing and social housing and rent-controlled housing mixed up. So I again, for whatever you find the value, I would caution everyone that's involved in it, especially when you have to release these discussions to the public, to make sure that definition is very clear to everybody. Because the lay person, and rightly so, and when Councillor Gardner speaks of somebody being evicted, they're thinking, why can't I find a place that's cheap to rent? That doesn't necessarily go under the definition of, in their minds, of what affordable housing is. So, I mean, we need to make sure that message is out front as well to understand what it is we're discussing, because that's the frustration of people when they come to me and say, well, there's no affordable housing. It's like, why can't you have that row house or whatever it is? Not to typify something, but, rent shouldn't be over $800. That's not what affordable housing is defined as. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Yeah, the whole, there is often a lot of confusion about that, but I think it's safe to say that we have a housing crisis in general, and I understand maybe we can ask Tim and or Peter to come back with a report after you have spoken to the city on exactly what the status of that working group is, so that we can get down to business and at least come up with some ideas on whether or not there's what we can do about this critical situation. So thank you for that. On to tenders and quotations. Ben, you're up. Oh, no. Okay, yeah, go ahead. We have microsurfacing. And clerk, please put it on the table.
It's moved by Councillor Fraser, seconded by Councillor McDonald, that the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas and Glengarry accept the joint tender from Duncor Enterprises Incorporated for microsurfacing on various roads at their unit prices totaling $608,896 plus HST. The joint tender includes the following: United Counties of SDG, $505,984, Municipality of South Dundas, $102,912, and that the Director of Transportation be authorized to sign all necessary documents to give effect to the contract.
Thank you for that. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Warden. Good morning, Council. So we have first microsurfacing. which county staff maintain is a good value for investment on getting the life out of our roads. So we have we went joint with South Dundas on this, and their portion of the tender was provisional. They have not taken it to their council yet. So regardless of their decision there's no risk for us to award this today if you choose to. We received 2 bids. The pricing was very close on these bids. However, it was more or less in line with what county staff anticipated for pricing. So we believe the amounts are satisfactory in our opinion. And as stated earlier, the county portion is $505,984,000, and our budget was $555,000. So this would be below budget.
Thank you very much. Questions, comments? Yes, go ahead, Councillor Wirt.
Through you, Madam Chair. Mike, just as a benchmark, what percentage are we up from last year on the same service, roughly?
I didn't prepare that in advance, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Ben, would you have that handy?
At your convenience. There's no rush. I'm always interested to see how the market's evolving, I guess is the best way to frame it. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Are there any other questions? Ben, you can just interrupt us when you have the answer there. So if there's nothing else, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Carried, none opposed. Thank you very much. Moving on to concrete box culvert pre-purchase. Go ahead.
It's moved by Councillor Smith, seconded by Councillor Gardner, that the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas and Glengarry accept the tender from Power Precast Solutions for the purchase of various precast concrete structures at the total price of $649,595, and that the provisional item for the Cardinal Municipal Drain totaling $179,464.37 be deleted from the tender, which will result in an overall contract price of $470,130.63 plus HST, and that the Director of Transportation Services be authorized to sign all necessary documents to give effect to the contract.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Mike.
So what we have here is our pre-purchase of concrete box structures, which we've been doing annually. We have a lot of success doing this, and then later only tendering out the installation of the boxes to a contractor rather than have them procure the structures as part of their contract. So we have these structures: Hullville Creek Culvert in Hullville on County Road 1, Dorn Bay Culvert on County Road 2 just east of Iroquois, Lakeshore Culvert on former County Road 4, now known as Lakeshore Drive, belonging to South Dundas, the Hosick Bridge Twin Culverts, which is a conversion from a bridge to a twin culvert structure, and the Cardinal Municipal Drain Culvert on County Road 20 on the southern edge of Dominionville. Of note here, we are seeing pricing that is somewhat larger than anticipated at last fall when we were doing budgeting. Several factors coming together for this. Number one, we put the budget together last fall before we had the sizes finalized, most of which were designed by our consultant Jacobs and passed by the conservation authorities for their approval. So we had hydraulic studies done to confirm the adequate sizing. Several of the box culverts are a little larger than we had anticipated at the time of budget. Of course, the cost of materials has only gone up since then, and that's adding to it as well. The structure at Cardinal, we determined to make provisional because of its dimensions. It was anticipated to be more dollars per meter than the other structures, and indeed we found that the pricing for that one was a lot higher than expected. As you can see in Table 1 on the second page of this document. I've reached out to a steel pipe supplier and found that they could provide equivalent corrugated steel pipes to what's at that crossing now at Cardinal. and we could see some savings. It would have a reduced lifespan. However, if we were to switch that structure to corrugated steel pipes, we could complete this year's program much closer to our actual budget. Also of note, we did close the tender for the replacement for the demolition of Hosick Bridge and replace with the two culverts. We closed that late last week, and the pricing is somewhat favorable. We will only be marginally over budget on that one item, but within about $15,000. So overall, the program is coming together at the moment satisfactorily. We do close another bridge this week and another bridge next week. So at our April council meeting, we will have a lot more pricing to provide for you. At the moment, however, we are recommending that this be passed or approved with the exception of Cardinal, and that council direct us to go for a tender for CSPs for Cardinal Municipal Drain.
Okay, thank you for that, Mike. So just to clarify, so you're saying that you'd like us to pass this motion for the essentially what is $470,000 by removing the Cardinal drain, and you'll come back to us with that number at a subsequent meeting.
A separate quotation for
separate quotation
for Cardinal Municipal Drain. Yes.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments on this? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? Carried. None opposed. Thank you for that. Oh, we have something.
Yeah, just to go back on the microsurfacing tender. So we did, it's about a 20% increase in price compared to low bid last year. That's plus or minus. Last year's tender was a little bit more, so you can discount some for economies of scale, but that's the ballpark we're in for increase.
Thank you for that, Ben. Okay, now we're on to CCTV storm sewer asset management inspections. Go ahead, Clerk.
It's moved by Councillor Warden, seconded by Councillor Wirt, that the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas and Glengarry accept Part 1 of the tender for storm sewer and flushing and camera inspections from on-site sewer services at their unit prices totaling $68,406.25 plus HST, and that the Director of Transportation Services be authorized to sign all necessary documents to give effect to the contract, and that the Director of Transportation Services be authorized to award Part 2 of the tender for storm sewer and flushing and camera inspections to on-site sewer services at their unit prices totaling $54,926.80 plus HST, contingent on receipt of funding from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. So as you'll recall, we did CCTV inspections for 3 of our municipalities last summer. We did North Dundas, South Dundas, and North Stormont. It turned out to be quite the ambitious program, and this year we sought to break it up and try and manage the quantity of work that way. So our tender broke up North Glengarry, South Glengarry, and South Stormont into 3 parts, of which North Glengarry is Part 1 and South Glengarry is Part 2. The pricing that we have received is higher than anticipated this year. And what we have budgeted is $65,000, and Part 1, North Glengarry, came in at roughly $68,000. We do have an application with FCM for approximately $50,000, which, if we're successful, would be sufficient to cover a second part. We are proposing that we proceed with North Glengarry first, as the information that would be received from this program would help to bolster the design of Alexandria Main Street, which we are going out for RFPs later this year. So having that information in hand would be very useful to whichever consultant we end up selecting for that. And at this time, we are recommending that Part 3, South Stormont, be left out, and that be next year's program, and following that we move on a 6-year rotation through each of the townships and municipality to stay on top of our assets that way.
Very good. Thank you for that. Questions or comments? Go ahead, Councillor Warden.
Through Ms. Warden. There's such a big difference between the highest quote on the bottom, that just, I'm curious to know if were they doing something in gold, or like, it just doesn't make any sense that there's such a big gap.
I recall last year there was a fair amount of difference on the pricing as well, and I'm not entirely sure why this is. I do note that we made some changes to the tender this year to describe what would be included and what would not be included, and be very firm on what we would consider as an extra. And we do know that some of our sewers have not been looked at since they were installed, going on decades. Some of our outlets do need to be excavated somewhat so that they can facilitate the cleaning of them, which the flushing has to occur before they can inspect the pipe. And that work can increase the cost for a contractor who's doing it. And so I think that some of them are trying to manage their risks, and some of them are trying to win this and keep their crews busy this summer.
Okay, thank you for that. If there are no other questions or comments, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Okay, on to corrugated steel pipes, please.
It's moved by Councillor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Warden, that the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas and Glengarry accept the joint tender from Atlantic Industries Limited for corrugated steel pipe at their unit prices totaling $246,495.53 plus HST. The joint tender includes the following: United Counties of SDG, $142,683.97; City of Cornwall, $8,525.33; South Glengarry, $23,695.44; South Stormont, $34,249.64; South Dundas, $18,494.60; and North Dundas, $18,846.55, and that the Director of Transportation Services be authorized to sign all necessary documents to give effect to the contract.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. As described, the county portion here is $142,683.97. We had two bids received, and as you can see, Atlantic Industries was the price there. Of note, we did not receive a bid from a supplier that we anticipated to receive a bid from, and when we did ask them about that, they noted market uncertainty and not wanting to be locked into the price. So just a reminder that there are still supply chain issues that are affecting the industry at this moment, and affecting the pricing that we received. And I did note that this was a higher amount than last year. I don't have the percentage increase, but I can get that if you're interested. Other than that, it's before you.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments? Go ahead, Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you, through you, Madam Warden. And maybe this is something I've missed in the past, but the fact that the City of Cornwall is in on the joint tender, is that something we've done specifically with them in the past on this one? I mean, I think it's a good thing. I'm just wondering if I've missed this in the past.
From time to time, I believe so. I'm not familiar with this particular tender, if that's something that we have been doing, but we do try to cooperate with them when the opportunity is there.
Okay, thank you. Oh, go ahead, Ben.
Just quickly to clarify, the city does participate in all our, have the opportunity to participate in all our joint tenders, so it just depends on whether they just like any other municipality, they say yay or nay, and this is one they often do join us in. So SALT's a great example of another one that we are with the city, that the city participates with. So.
Great, thanks. Any other questions or comments? Okay, all in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you very much. Centerline markings, Madam Clerk.
It's moved by Councillor MacDonald, seconded by Councillor Smith, that the Council of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas and Glengarry accept the joint tender from Provincial Road Markings Incorporated for centerline pavement marking at their unit prices totaling $452,276 plus HST for 2022. The joint tender includes the following: United Counties, $397,100, Township of South Glengarry, $19,855, Township of North Glengarry, $12,540, Township of South Stormont, $8,987, Township of North Stormont, $6,479, Township of North Dundas, $7,315, and that the term of the contract with this company include an option to renew for one additional one-year term, 2023, and that the Director of Transportation Services be authorized to sign all necessary documents to give effect to this contract.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Go ahead.
Thank you. So we had done something similar last year where we had the option to go for one additional term. However, that was turned down by the contractor this year, I believe, so we had to go back out for tender. Also, if you'll recall, there was an issue in Texas with the paint plants, and last year we had some issues with paint procurement. So this year we were expecting a much higher increase in price. Fortunately, it did not quite inflate as high as we anticipated, so we are below budget on this one. The county portion being $397,100, and our budget was $450,000. What county staff would like to do this year is use up some of that remaining money in getting ahead on white line marking, which, as we note in the financial analysis, we have some flexibility to do some extra white line this year. Typically, we do about 80 to 90% of our line work, and the white lines, which aren't mandatory, tend to get left behind if they're not, if there's insufficient funds and if they're just not too bad. This year, we'd like to get ahead on them with your blessing.
Mike, you've been busy. Okay, questions? Okay, Councillor Gardner, thank you.
Thanks, Warden Williams. Just a quick comment, just because we're talking about line painting. Morseburg Streetscape, some people have made the comment that the lines look faded already. Were they temporary until the project's complete, or something to look into?
Those lines, I don't believe, were painted as part of the line painting program last year. I believe that they were part of the contract itself.
Okay.
So it would have been a different product at a different time.
Yeah, I'll take that one too, because it's I'm sure as time goes on, this will become apparent. On new asphalt, when we paint once, just one layer, it'll wear off relatively easy. And so what happens is over time, as you kind of build up that paint layer, it actually stays a lot better. So you'll always see that kind of on our newly paved roadways, that the lines look a little bit more faded than the rest of the road network. And in a year or two, it'll actually catch up.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. If there are no other questions or comments, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. And thanks, Mike, for your many reports. Okay, would anyone like a 5-minute break, or do you want to just go? We're good to go? All right, we're good to go. Number 8, bylaws. Agreement with Daisy Group. Madam Clerk?
It's moved by Councillor McGillis, seconded by Councillor Jaworski, that bylaw number 5341, being a bylaw to authorize the warden and clerk to execute an agreement with the Daisy Group to advocate for capital funding for the Dundas and Maxville Manors, be read and passed in open council, signed and sealed.
Okay, Tim, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Warden. Good morning again. This is a report that recommends that we enter into a 4-month agreement with the Daisy Group. That name might not be familiar to you, but the principal at Daisy Group is Warren Kinsella, who you probably would recognize that name from provincial circles. So the genesis of this was discussion amongst the boards of those two facilities with members of County Council. We had a meeting in Winchester several weeks ago where we talked about a lot of different things in terms of trying to help the manors procure the money that they need to move forward. Council recall that we've got $6.5 million in the bank right now waiting for their capital redevelopments, and essentially they've been stuck for several years now. They don't have, with COVID in particular and some other factors, they don't have the money they need to actually get off the ground and start. So I know through their provincial associations and through their boards of directors, they've been working tirelessly with our MPP and others to try to get the money they need to make these things happen, and it hasn't happened yet. So there's a window now, like I talk about in the report. There's a 4-month window leading up to the provincial election where if we leverage these funds and sign a contract with the DAISY group, they'll work their advocacy provincially to try to get the funds that these facilities need to go forward. So it's before you today for debate and possible approval. And I know I mentioned quickly in the report, I know certainly Councillor McDonald and Warden Williams will be familiar with the DAISY group. They've worked for them in the context of procuring some funding they need for some of their infrastructure. So it's here before you, and if Council's in agreement, we would execute an agreement with the DAISY group, and they would start tomorrow, as far as I know, and they would go for 4 months and see what they can come up with. So I did speak with the treasurer this morning, the director of financial services, in terms of the $30,000, because it would be, she spoke about providing funding to external sources for COVID, but because the contract would be between the DAISY group and the county, and because of the nature of it being in the context of COVID, we think we can charge it to that $1.2 million that we have. So there'd be no net impact to our taxpayers. So we're recommending we go ahead, see what they can. It might bear fruit, might not, but it's another way we can try to help our we have 2 nonprofits in the county, and those are the 2 of them. So thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions, or Councillor Williams or Councillor Fraser, Armstrong, or McDonald, who've been part of those discussions.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Councillor McDonald and Councillor McGillis, please.
Thank you, Madam Warden. So we met with both manors, and they were making that capital request to us. We told them that we've already done our budget, we've already gone to the well in this term. We would likely have to wait for a new council because we wouldn't want to be, putting this onto another council. We also said that I think that we've come to the table with some good money, and I think that the best way that we can help them is through advocacy like this. As we said, the Township of North Glengarry, we went to all those dog and pony shows for 10 years at Good Roads and at AMO, and we met with everybody, and you meet and you get your 15 minutes and then nothing. What the DAISY group did for us was get us into offices, not for just 15 minutes, got us into offices for 2-hour meetings, meeting directly with the Minister of Infrastructure, meeting directly with the Chief of Staff at the time for Dalton McGuinty. He put us in the room with the right people, and this is what they do. So I think it's worthwhile for us to move forward with it. I hope County Council will agree, and if they do, there is a weekly call for updates. So if the rest of County Council is in agreement with that, I would suggest that perhaps the North Glengarry and the North Dundas members of Council would sit in on those weekly calls, as well as our CAO, Tim. So just a suggestion for that, but thank you, Madam Warden.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McGillis. And then
Thank you.
Councillor
I would support this request. The money's coming from the COVID fund. I was looking at maybe the reserve fund at first, but this is a great idea. We talked about that on the phone. So yeah, I think it's a good idea to see if they can get some support through the province to get the the funding that they need to continue. I just have a couple of questions. What is the shortfall in revenue that the 2 manors are facing at this time? That wasn't in the report. I think that's important.
I don't have that at my fingertips. I
believe it's
25
million.
Well, 20 million each, I think.
Yeah, it's over 20 million each.
Yeah, it's easily double from what their initial, and while some of it is definitely supply chain issues, but obviously some of it is related to COVID. Most of it's related to COVID, and especially I'm more familiar with the Maxwell Manor, is that they're building them into pods. So that if something ever like this happens again, and it probably will, they'll be more prepared for it. So preparing for the future. And the other thing I just failed to mention was that the government has put a date of 2025 for all these beds to be changed over. It's nice when you can give a deadline but not give the money to back it up.
And secondly on that, we don't want them to come back and say, okay, no problem, wait till 2027. I mean, it needs to be done, and it needs to be done right, so, thank you, Madam Warden.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor McGillis.
Thank you. Just because you said that, I have it led to another question I have. Like the money that like our obligation that we are going to fund this 6.5 million to help them in their reconstruction. Is there a timeline that we have to keep this money in our reserves? I know we should wait long enough to see if this group can get some funding, and they should also look at, because there's a conference coming up, to see if you can maybe get some meetings going at this time. So I think okay, good. But yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, is there a timeline that we have for keeping this money in the reserves in terms of our obligation?
Not so far as I'm aware. It's sitting in the reserves until council decides to move it or change it or leave it. So there's no timeline at this point. Councillor McGillis.
Councillor Armstrong, and then Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you, Warden. To piggyback on what Councillor McDonald had to say, as was stated, and I believe it was he that stated it at the time when we first had the debate, this is still, and was at the time when we debated it, it is a generational issue. We have people perishing. There is no hyperbole that can be put on these two manors as to how they're functioning with less than standard buildings, let alone future rated buildings. We need to do this. We've done it as a council. We've done it at the two lower level councils. And quite frankly, we are where we are, where essentially we're starting at zero because the costs have easily doubled. So whatever we've contributed, whatever the province has contributed, we're back again as if we're trying to build two brand new buildings. It's the only two not-for-profits that we have. It's our relatives, our friends, our neighbors. They're not ready for the future. They're barely ready for the present. So we need to be more aggressive than we've been. As Councillor McDonald said, we've been polite. We've gone through the process and we've gotten nowhere. So we need to make this an issue. It is the prime time, being a provincial election. We need to make it. This is not something to be discussed about after there's election stumping. It needs to be done now, and it needs to be done by an aggressive group. And I do believe we will, but I really hope that this table supports it, because if you get to the nitty gritty of it, the two buildings are, I mean, they should be commended that they're operating the way they are now, but it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable on any level. So I certainly hope that we lend our support to this.
Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you, through you, Madam Warden. And I'm happy to follow Councillor Armstrong once again on making comments, because he's made a lot of excellent points that I'd like to build on. I think, in a perfect world, we wouldn't need to do this. In a perfect world, the funding would flow appropriately for things like this. But our ultimate responsibility is to our residents. And if we have the horsepower to do this, we should be doing it. Sort of like with the mobile crisis response team again. it helps our residents, and we should be doing it. And the LTC residents are our residents, as they're our neighbors, but they're also, they're the people that we are responsible to. And I think, although they did fairly well locally throughout the pandemic, there's no secret that, so Canada did well in the pandemic, but where we didn't do well and we did worse than our comparative countries is the fatality rates in long-term care. We actually did very poorly there. And some of it comes back to specifically these kinds of issues of how these buildings are laid out. And, this is something we need to do, to your point, Councillor Armstrong, about, they're barely ready for today. They're definitely not ready for the future. And if we want to make them more resilient for the future, this is definitely what we need to do. And we hear that there's federal, COVID funding that went to the provinces, and apparently in Ontario, there's still quite a bit that's unspent. So again, now is our opportunity to, bring this to the forefront and make sure that our residents are properly cared for. So I absolutely think this is the right thing for us to be doing today.
Thank you, Councillor Jaworski. If there are no other comments or questions, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Carried, none opposed. Thank you very much for that. On to 8.2, Joint Health and Safety Policy Procedure Manual Review. Catherine. Go ahead, please.
It's moved by Councillor
Oh,
Wirt,
sorry.
seconded by Councillor Jaworski, that bylaw number 5342, being a bylaw to adopt the Joint Health and Safety Guidelines and the Health and Safety Policy and Procedures Manual for 2022, be read and passed in open council, signed and sealed.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Now you can go, Catherine.
Excellent, thank you. Good morning, Madam Warden, fellow councillors. The county's Joint Health and Safety Committee undertakes an annual review of our health and safety policy and program. And through this review, they look at the overall efficacy of our safety programming, as well as ensuring that we're meeting all of our regulatory obligations under the Ontario Occupational Health and Safety Act. Through the review that was conducted in 2022, the following updates were included in our manual. There were minor modifications, corrections, and formatting throughout the document. The chapter on personal protective equipment, and in particular hearing conservation, was updated to reflect our hearing conservation program and ensure that we were following all of the data that we had pulled through our dosimetry testing for proper hearing protection. Addendum 11A and 11B, which is our fire safety plan for both 26 Pitt Street and the jail, were updated by combining them into one document, and this was done based on discussions with the City of Cornwall's fire services to streamline our documents in that respect. And lastly, Addendum 13, which is our task hazard risk assessment form, was added to the addendums of the manual. And this is a hazard assessment that's done at pre-start by our patrol supervisors for a number of our higher risk projects throughout the construction season. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your report. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Catherine. On to roadside signage policy. Madam Clerk.
It's moved by Councillor Warden, seconded by Councillor Wirt, that bylaw number 5343, being a bylaw to adopt policy 2-16, roadside signage policy, be read and passed in open council, signed and sealed.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you. I won't present it. I've talked about this long enough, I think. So if there's any questions, happy to answer them.
Okay, that was short and sweet. Anybody have any questions or comments on Ben's report? Go ahead, Councillor Warden.
Thank you, Ben. I had a question. What do you do with old signs? I was driving up Apple Hill, coming south out Apple Hill, and I noticed somebody had what looked to be a former county sign on their private property. And I thought, what do we do with our old signs? And is it something that we could, if they don't meet the standard, could they be sold and use the money for something?
I would say in the majority are recycled, more or less. We have given some to, for example, and I'm not sure if this is exactly a scenario we've done, but for example, if Friends of the Summerstown Trail needed a stop sign and we had an old one that was no longer met the reflectivity, we'd give it to them. We've never tried to sell. Sometimes that kind of effort is more effort than it's worth, if I can be perfectly honest. So if it's something you want us to look into, I'm happy to come back and kind of give you a kind of summary. I really hadn't thought too much about it, quite honestly.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anything else? Anyone else? Okay, all in favor of the motion? Thank you. Carried. All right. On to official plan amendment number 9, Moose Creek Landfill Expansion, GFL Environmental. Madam Clerk.
It's moved by Councillor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Warden, that bylaw number 5344, being a bylaw to adopt official plan amendment number 9 to the official plan of the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry, be read and passed in open council, signed and sealed.
Thank you very much. Peter, go ahead.
Thank you, Warden and Council. As stated in the report, this is for the potential expansion of the Eastern Ontario Waste Handling Facility, or the Moose Creek Landfill in North Dormont. The application for the landfill itself is a bit larger than the area covered by the official plan amendment. The official plan amendment is only for the area that's right now agricultural resource lands in the county official plan. So the proponent did do an evaluation through the provincial policy statement on the agricultural lands, and we also circulated that to AMAFRA, who didn't have any concerns as well. So we're recommending adoption of this bylaw that would allow expansion, potentially 230 hectares of land for the landfill towards Highway 138 from the current location. And I'll just note as well, it's supported by the Township of North Dormont, and the applicant also did some open houses and public consultation. And actually the formal consultation we had no public comments against as well, which is for a landfill, that's definitely a credit to the process in engaging the community. So we're recommending council adopt this bylaw and approve the amendment.
Thank you for that. Any questions? There's been a lot of work done on this by evidence of all of the paper for sure. Okay, seeing nothing, all in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you very much. Shared Services Agreement for Land Use Planning, Township of North Glengarry. Go ahead, Peter. Sorry.
It's moved by Councillor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor McGillis, that bylaw number 5345, being a bylaw to authorize a shared services agreement, planning services, with the Township of North Glengarry, be read and passed in open council, signed and sealed.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Warden and Council. So this is a shared services agreement for planning with Township of North Glengarry. The format's similar to the agreements we have with North Dormont and with the municipality of South Dundas. I'll note that the township, they did add an additional staff person as well that would be supporting this. So the county involvement would be more, let's say, in some of the larger subdivisions and rezoning projects. But most of the day-to-day in terms of the variances and meeting at the local level would be through North Glengarry staff. So we're not recommending any additions to county staff, and we're recommending council approve this bylaw. And I think we said at the previous council meeting we'll report back to council at the end of the year in terms of what revenue is generated through shared services and just for an evaluation by council as well.
Okay, thank you for your report. Any questions? All in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter. On to the consent agenda. Madam Clerk.
It's moved by Councillor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor McGillis, that all items listed under the consent agenda section of the agenda be received for information purposes.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments on the consent agenda? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you very much. On to boards and committees. We had our first in-person meeting with the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus. That was a couple of weeks ago in Napanee, and Tim and I went up together. It was really great to actually finally meet some of these people. I'd seen them only via Zoom, so we were able to have a social and an evening and chat and find out what's going on in the rest of Eastern Ontario. The meeting on the Friday was basically all priority setting. The morning started with a strategy session with John Matheson, who is quite the political strategist, I have to tell you. He's pretty impressive. And so he ran the session where we discussed what the top 3 priorities were going to be for the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus for this year. There were a lot of ideas put on the table, and actually physician recruitment was one of them. It is, a problem across rural Ontario. There's no question it was a common theme, a common problem, but because it wasn't exclusively an Eastern Ontario problem, it wasn't considered to be one of the top priorities, but it will be worked on in the background. Similarly, Tim and I put our rural education strategy on the table because we wanted that to be a priority for the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus. There's no question that rural education there are commonalities across Eastern Ontario in terms of the issues with regards to school closures and, the impending lifting of the moratorium and just overall education inequity. However, it was what we were told, and I forget the warden's name. Tim, he sits on your committee.
Yes,
Dennis
Doyle
Doyle
from Frontenac County.
Yeah. So his comment was that the school coalition, the Community Schools Alliance, is already on this file. And that probably what we should do is we should work closely with the coalition and use the resources that are already out there and avoid any kind of duplication. So even though we push to have it as a top priority, it was put in the ongoing advocacy stream. So it'll still be there, but it's not one of the top priorities. Ontario Health Teams was identified as one of the priorities. Long-term care, both of those were on last year, and again, affordable housing was really topped the ticket. Everybody's falling all over themselves trying to figure out what to do about this, but the Warden's Caucus is on it as one of the top 3 priorities. So I just wanted to give you that update. In terms of the Joint Liaison Committee, Councillor Armstrong?
We haven't had a meeting. Our next meeting is upcoming.
Okay, very good, thank you. Library Board, Councillor Warden? Okay, Landry, go ahead.
Through you, Madam Warden. Basically, we covered a couple, or actually I'd like to mention that we were back in person, so we attended the Alexandria branch, and I was actually excited to see my fellow board members in person for a change. So we dealt with a couple of policies, just reviewing our policies. There was discussion on some of our inactive patrons that we're going to deal with. And lastly, is we had some of our members that attended the OLA conference in end of January, February, and they reported back as far as their attendance. So lastly is we also brought up, or I was given the opportunity to find out where we stand as far as opening our library. And before I mess it all up, I'll get Karen maybe just to give a brief to all of council if there's any patrons asking where we stand as far as with the new no mask or where we stand with the opening of our libraries. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Warden and Council. Yes, just to kind of recap on what's happened with our reopening. As of Monday, March 14th, beginning of March break, we did, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. As Council probably knows, we have maintained library services in one form or another throughout the entire pandemic, through branch location closures, through having to isolate and quarantine library materials, through pivoting to a virtual program delivery model, et cetera, but we have been able to keep library services going throughout the pandemic. However, as of Monday, March 14th, for the first time since the pandemic started, we opened our doors to full hours with no limits on capacity or time spent in our branches. On that during the week that we wanted to be open for March break, especially for our families that were hanging around SDG during the time. So we did require that anybody visiting still wore a mask, of course, and as of today, that requirement is lifted. We are still encouraging staff to wear masks if they feel so. We can't mandate it any longer, but we do encourage it, and the counties has been very kind in providing masks for staff to continue wearing, especially if they come out behind their plexiglass workstations and helping people at computers, et cetera, so we are still operating with a virtual program delivery model for the time being, but our team is working together to start planning for more in-person program activities as we go forward. I'm sure there are going to be families with young children who will definitely look forward to having their, story time restarted, and we are going to be gearing up to get ready for our summer reading program. So all of those activities are in the works still, but we are open for business, full scale, and very happy to be able to serve everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your update. Go ahead, Councillor Smith.
Karen, while she was still up there, I was just going to ask if you wanted to mention a few words on our overdue. We're in the process of engaging in an overdue strategic plan policy, and we have a workshop in April. Is this something you would like to?
Yep.
You
So
do a better
yeah,
job than I could.
A couple of other initiatives that have been started as of March 1st was we've gone fine-free for children's materials. So anything that's with a J at the front of it and on its spine label or whatnot is now fine-free. This is a very concerted effort to do what we can to encourage literacy development, not just for kids, but for anyone who wants to increase their literacy levels. And books and materials for kids are a good way to kind of get your feet wet with that. So that's a nice thing. We started out with waiving fines. Well, we had, during the pandemic, of course, we'd suspended any fine collection. And then from January through till the end of February, we waived any outstanding fines. And as of March 1st, we're permanently waiving all fines on children's materials. It does mean that we kind of have also tightened up and shortened up our period of time where we allow people just to kind of hang on to things. So they're going to be getting notifications more frequently on other items that, or on their items to bring them back, because there still will be replacement costs involved. The idea is to get the stuff back, but we're also, combining that with trying to get people develop their literacy. And the other part is we are in the middle, about the middle point now of a strategic planning process. We've gone with a third-party consultant to help facilitate the process, and especially the heavy lifting that's involved with community engagement. So over the last 6 to 8 weeks, we have been, the consultancy firm out of Peterborough has been leading key information meetings, focus group meetings. We've had a public survey available both online and in print form at our library branches to get feedback from people on what they like about the library, where they see some potential for change, things that are not working so well from the public's perspective. And we're taking that information, and we're going to be heading into a library board pre-retreat meeting to hear what the consultants have to say about what they've heard from the communities. And then we'll be going into an actual drafting of a new strat plan in May, okay? Or late April and May.
Great,
okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Councillor Landry.
If I may add, so I believe the survey that Karen's talking about was forwarded, I believe Kimberly forwarded to all members of council, if you want to take the 5 or 10 minutes. So Karen, I did mine. So if you guys have any ideas or input you can bring forward, it's a short little survey that you would have received a link for. So it'd be appreciated.
Great, thank you for that. Thank you, Karen. Police Services Board, is that Councillor Wirt or Councillor McGillis? Councillor... Oh,
we had a meeting. It was very short. They had a review of the security prisoner transportation program, which is quite in depth. And if anybody wants to review it, we'll be happy to send them the long report that they gave us. We talked a little bit about the hiring of the Justice of the Peace. They're going to be hiring different districts that are short, and because of the backlog of the court system. So that's, they're in the process right now of doing the hiring. So there was a lot of applications submitted, and I guess we're going to wait and see how that unfolds. The MSO our Maison Baldwin are very thankful and grateful for the funding that we gave them from the counties here, SDG counties, and it's just a letter of thank you and support. So that's about all, I think.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McGillis. Eastern Ontario Health Unit, Councillor Gardner.
Thanks, Warden. I forgot my notes, but I think they did report a 1% increase, correct, for budget?
Yes.
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 Good.
Mhm.
Okay. And we had, so if I look at the thing, we did, obviously COVID and living with COVID was a large part of the conversation. We also talked about messaging around bullying in our communities and folks that are going to wear masks versus folks that are happy that the mask mandate has been lifted, and how important it is to respect individual choices. They're having a lot of conversation about that at the school level, because some families, their kids are not comfortable yet, and there is a worry within the community that the bullying around that choice will definitely make life miserable for some folks. So we had talked with that. Dr. Paul talked about the fact he's going to include that in the messaging whenever, as we live with COVID. So we had the budget updates on that. Oh, and new dental facility in Cornwall will be on the books. So that was exciting and good news. I don't know if you're aware, but the Eastern Ontario Health Unit does have a dental facility, and they will be opening it up. Their focus mainly is on seniors. For dental care, which is vitally important. So that was really good news. And I don't know, Madam Warden, did I miss?
No, you didn't miss anything, but
Okay.
just with regards to the lifting of the mask mandate, Dr. Paul did say he had lobbied for that mandate not to be lifted until April, but it was, I think, perhaps a political decision, and so it got lifted early, and that's what Councillor Gardner was referring to in terms of some of the difficulties it potentially causing those people who are going to choose to wear their mask. We must be understanding and very accepting of that. So, Glenstordon Lodge, Councillor Warden.
Through you, Warden. I don't have an update. Our meeting is next Thursday. I know that there's still there's no more outbreak, so I'll have an update at the next meeting.
Thank you very much. Cornwall and Area Housing. Do you have anything, Councillor Smith?
So I'll take this briefly. We haven't been called to a meeting with any of the concerns over some in-camera sessions that were left on the back burner. Other than that, we're not called to any regular meetings.
Okay. Thank you very much. St. Lawrence River Institute, Councillor Gardner.
We did have a meeting March 9th. It was a special meeting just to go over budget and organizational issues. Not much to report.
Okay, thank you very much. Raisin South Nation Source Water Protection, we haven't had a meeting most recently. So on to Municipal Advisory Algonquin Land Claim, Councillor Fraser.
Madam Warden, nothing to report.
Nothing to report. Eastern Ontario Agri-Food Network, there is ongoing work there, working out some of the nuts and bolts of the strategic plan that was recently unveiled, and I will report after our next meeting. The annual meeting's coming up. And then the Regional Emergency Response Council, the last meeting really was talking about the crisis in housing, and all of the agencies that were on that call were having the same conversation that we've had here today with regards to what can be done. It's an emergency, and there were little to no solutions that were provided at that table either, because they said that there is no emergency housing. They had a pool of money that they were actually putting people in hotels and that those dollars ran out. So it really is a crisis situation. So that's all I really have to report on that. If there is nothing else, we're into key information. 11.1, live streaming county council meetings. Go ahead, Kim, you can report on that.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Warden. As Council is well aware, at the onset of the pandemic, we did shift to online meetings, and we began live streaming these meetings so that they were open and legal meetings, and the public still had access. Even since then, since we've been back in council chambers, we've continued to live stream all of our meetings and archive them on our YouTube channel. They're pretty well received. We get quite a few views. I think a lot afterwards. People refer back to them. The media really, really likes this service as well. Now that our council chambers is back and open to the public, staff is recommending that we do continue live streaming our meetings. We are not obligated to, as our council chambers is open to the public again, but we think it's a good service to provide to the public, and I'm happy to get some council feedback on that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Warden, and then Councillor Gardner.
Through you, Warden. I think this is a good step. I mean, we have it established now. I don't think we should go back. It gives transparency, and not everybody is available during the day, so I think they can watch it at their own time.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, exactly what Councillor Warden has said. I think it provides equity too for folks that maybe aren't comfortable coming in public, for people that are working, that type of thing. I think the transparency is huge, the accessibility. I think it's the way it should be, actually. So yeah, I'm in support.
Okay, I get. Okay, go ahead, Kim.
Thank you. We'll continue to enhance the service as well as we move forward. And I just wanted to thank Mike and Todd, who always do such a good job. So thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you on behalf of all of us. I get the feeling I don't see anybody doing this, so I'm assuming that everyone's in agreement to go ahead. Very good. Okay, thank you. On to 11.2, automated speed enforcement. Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you. This is kind of an interesting one, at least maybe for me. So, as council may be aware, the province of Ontario allows photo radar. Let's call it what it is. It's photo radar, and in certain areas within municipalities, it's essentially school zones and community safety zones. It's still a relatively new program in Ontario. So we see a lot of the, I would say, richer urban areas who have implemented this program over the last year or two, but it is slowly starting to kind of push out into municipalities like ourselves who struggle with speed enforcement and the complaints and concerns from our local communities around speed. So how it works is essentially you enter into a contract, you enter into actually 3 contracts, but we'll kind of break it out into the sites themselves and then the processing. So how it would work is the municipality would enter into a contract with the technology provider. There's a preferred technology vendor that the Ontario Traffic Council has selected, and essentially they come in with the cameras and they work out an agreement with you based on a cost per camera that you'd be installing, and you create you don't have to have it in the same spot. You can have multiple spots, and you can select how many cameras you want to use within those spots, and then a rotation of how often those cameras get moved from spot to spot to spot. So, for example, you can have 20 spots and 2 cameras, and at any given time, one of those 2 cameras might be at, or one of those cameras might be at one of those 20 spots. So it's an interesting way to provide speed compliance. If you do have those cameras installed, you do have to have the right kind of signage out on site. So I give examples in the key information report about what that signage looks like, and essentially what happens after that. So that's the sites and how that technology works. When those cameras are operational, we then have to have an agreement with a processing center. So it's a excuse me, let me just make sure I got this term correct. It's a joint processing center. Right now, the City of Toronto is the only one that has a joint processing center, but there are other municipalities considering opening it up. opening up joint processing centers, and what happens is the prosecutor will look at those pictures that have been taken, connect the license plate that's been captured with the owner of that vehicle, and issue a fine based on whatever the speed radar has picked up. So very relatively straightforward. You're renting the camera, you're working with a processing center and to process that stuff, and fines are coming in, and that's how the on a very high level how this system works. Now, what I want to bring to the reason I'm bringing this forward to council is it's out there right now, and I'm sure we're going to start to hear a lot about it in more rural municipalities. In a perfect world, and this is how I like to think about it, and I guess what I'm encouraging councils to think about it this way as well. If you look at it from the cost side of things, we should never think of it as, number one, we should never think of it as a revenue generator. This is not about generating revenue. This is about getting traffic to comply with posted speed limits. So it's all about safety. And in a perfect world, the way I like to think about this is if it's working perfectly, we're not catching any speeders because everybody is following the speed limit. The reality is that's not how it works, and so just based on data that's been collected through Ontario right now, there's about 90% of, they have a 90% capture rate, and that's a conservative capture rate. So, license plates that are obscured or maybe not there, or all those kinds of things might interfere with how successful they're capturing license plates. There is some contested tickets as well, so a certain amount of those that have been caught, they contest, and then of course you go through that process. So if you, just based on and this is information from the technology supplier, but again, based on data that they have, if you are generating 6 fines per day in a given site, the average fine is about $77. You've got a total revenue of about $460 per day. And that's based on those capture rates and contested tickets that I mentioned. The cost to operate is about $450 a day. So one camera, you're about revenue neutral based on the information they have for relatively conservative traffic counts, relatively conservative number of people who are exceeding the posted speed limit, and how much we're getting back versus paying. So that's kind of in a nutshell what the cost of that program is per camera. So it ends up being relatively revenue neutral. Effectiveness, so far what we've seen across Ontario is that these programs are very effective. So City of Ottawa in 2020 did a pilot study. They had a speed compliance increase go from 23% to close to 50%. So incredibly effective. It works very, very well. And not only that, unfortunately, just because this is still relatively new information, when you look at, it's one thing to look at how good people are following the speed limits, another thing to actually look at the impact on collision frequency and severity, and that takes more time, and they just haven't been able to, more time has to elapse in that program to be able to come back and say we've seen an X amount of decrease in severe collisions or number of collisions. So there's still data that's being generated that I think is going to be very interesting for municipalities. So the reason I bring this key information report forward, I do want to bring it to council's attention. It is something that we can, as an organization, look into. At a very high level, I've kind of laid out in my key information report what we'd have to do. One is really, it's the analysis of traffic data to determine how many potential sites that there are, and if we need to collect more data to continue to find more sites. Creating a community safety zone policy so that we can start identifying and designating community safety zones. We have to do site investigations. It's one thing to say we want to put up these cameras. It's a whole other thing that the site is actually good to put up the cameras. So, for example, if you're in a curved road or it's lots of trees, it might not be the right site because you can't actually capture license plates. And then, of course, getting into the financial feasibility of it. So what's the right number of cameras based on our traffic counts, number of locations that we've identified, administrative costs, and then getting into the agreements and implementation of the program. So there's a lot of work behind it, and what I'm looking for is council's feedback on if it's something that you'd like our department to investigate further. One thing I do want to note is we do have a ton of work in front of us, if I'm being quite honest with you. So it does create some, I would suggest, some challenges, and likely is not something that we can, without some external support, do this year. But it is something, if council wants to see this as a priority, because I'm sure around your local municipalities, just like us, it's a common ongoing longstanding issue. And to me, like this type of program is the best deterrence and the best way to get speed enforcement in our communities. So with that, I look for some feedback from council.
Okay, thank you. I just have a comment. We'll go with Landry, Councillor Landry, then Councillor Gardner. Just with regards to, your question is, you're saying that you would need a consultant to perform the background work on this, if it was considered a priority by this council right now. Otherwise, it would be put in the 2023 work plan. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I think it is something that we have the capacity and ability to do. It's just we've got, we're kind of booked.
Okay,
our capacity's full this year.
Before I go to comments here, so what if we went down this road and every single community across SDG that was either a town, a village, a hamlet would say, we need one on our street, right? So that's a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I can think of a bunch off the top of my head already where it probably makes a whole heck of a lot of sense to have these kinds of things. But it's also getting that, making sure that information is correct, making sure the sites are correct, because, this is, I'm giving a very high level overview of the program, but to actually hone into the right sites and the right locations to put these cameras is a whole other story altogether.
Right, thank you. Councillor Landry, go ahead.
Through you, Madam Warden. So I was taken back when I seen the not proposed, but the anticipated number of infraction or generating 400 and some, and then the cost per day at 400 and some, which there was like a $10. If our citizen abided by the law and none of them utilized, so we had one, say, or let's put it in a perfect scenario, we had zero. What is the cost to still maintain the project and not getting the revenues that are anticipated?
Right now, again, this is using the Toronto Joint Processing Center with, other ones coming online. We expect that there's going to be some competitive advantages to, people actually giving you a better price to process, if I'm just going to be frank with you. So right now it would be $450 a day based on current price. So we'd be paying $450 a day to get traffic to slow down in all of our communities.
If I may have subsequent, so a little personal story to all this. So there's frustration that can also be, so it's the bad apples that are creating this discussion to prevent the speeding. But the frustration I'm talking about is I was catching a flight in Montreal. I drove towards the airport at 5 o'clock in the morning. There was an 80-kilometer speed limit posted because of construction. But mind you, at 5 o'clock in the morning, there's nobody on the road. I'm by myself. There's not one car in sight. And when the flash came, I knew it was not a paparazzi. And so there was frustration as far as I was doing 90 kilometers an hour. So any manned state of a car sitting there would not have even moved or came after me. But the fact that it's photo radar is basically what's posted. So again, there's frustration on our resident. We are trying to, but I'm kind of eerie on the fact that if we're not maintaining revenue, then it becomes quite a cost if that doesn't meet the numbers. Thank you.
Councillor Gardner.
And thanks, Warden Williams. A couple of questions. First, they can be moved around, right? So if they're in an area that is not is not an issue, they can be moved on, correct, Ben?
That is 100% correct. So
having sat on the Police Services Board for 6 years, speed is one of the top five, right? Whenever they talk about fatalities and collisions and stuff like that. I support this. I would like to see, it almost needs to be jointly with the municipalities for school zones and stuff like that, right? Because very few schools, well, some of them are on county roads, but some of them aren't when we talk about the elementary end of things. And potentially municipalities might actually fund it if they know that they can move it and it can be part of their arsenal of tools to slow things down. Because I can't tell you how many speed calls I get. We put the other, the tool that we currently have, which measures and provides data, find out that it's to Councillor Landry's point, a couple of bad apples, it would be nice to make the point with those bad apples to just stop speeding in that area. So I think this is the way to go, especially with the pressures on policing. Our police officers can't be everywhere at every moment in time, and we put a lot of pressure on them when we call them up, and obviously it's not always a high priority. It is a priority, but it's not always a high priority. So I think this might solve some of that. It'd be a good solution, I think, a good tool, as long as we can move them around.
Okay, so Councillor Dworsky.
Thank you, through you, Madam Warden. I think this is one of those things that it's another good tool to have in the toolbox. And I think because, I mean, if, folks do complain about speed regularly, and, to be honest, we look at our budget here, like policing, it's over $10 million out of our, it's the second largest item after roads. We're already putting a lot of money towards it, and to Councillor Gardner's point, they can't really do any more with what there is. And if we want to have more officers, and they have to have a patrol car, we're talking about, over $200,000 investment for every additional officer. So, those are huge dollars to spend to address current residents' complaints about speeding. And so, if this, if this is a tool that can be done in a revenue neutral way, I think it makes complete sense. And to my understanding, we have a lot of control over how they're done, like what speed would give a ticket, whether they can be changed for time. No, you don't. Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad maybe I'll just finish my comment though, if you could provide more detail after. I think it's important that it's done in a revenue neutral way, because I think that's one of the negative, it's a hot topic, but it's generally because people say, well, it's a cash grab. But a cash grab implies that you're making a whole bunch of money off of it. But if it's just covering its cost, that's a different story. And I think sometimes that's because of the U.S. influence, where they literally certain municipalities really policing and jail and all that is a huge revenue stream. So I think if we do this, it's important to be clear with the public on what's the economics behind it as well. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
And just a point of clarity, so we have no say in terms of what triggers those cameras to actually take the picture. So that's done completely independent, and so we if it's set, you're in a 50 kilometer per hour zone, it might be at 51 kilometers an hour, it might be at 55. We have no idea. Road jurisdictions have no idea what the actual trigger point is for those cameras to take the picture. So. Of interest, and I agree. I see this, realistically, it's a revenue neutral thing. But I think as council, we have to go into it that we're not going to make $0. This is the 100% an expense that's going to slow down traffic. And if we have that mentality and it ends up we're revenue neutral, great. I don't know. Maybe that's not great. Maybe that's a sign that I'm sure it's going to be better. Let me put it to you that way.
Councillor McGillis and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I forgot to mention that Commander Mark Hemrick, he mentioned that the fact that at our last meeting, and that was just off the topic a little bit, but it's still the same idea, that there's more enforcement from cruisers that are enforcing more speeding issues on municipal roads. So that's going to help too as well. So because of the many complaints, so when people call us, he suggests for them to call the OPP department and put the complaint forward to them, not through us. So that's what I do now. When I get a complaint, here's the number, call, put the complaint in, and then they'll go and enforce it. Or they'll just maybe oversee if there's any speeding actually going on in there. I know that the other signs they put out, the digital signs, showing what the speed that you're going, they were ineffective. They're not very effective at all. People if it's there more than a week, they know that there's not going to be any discipline or anything for them speeding. So what they do is just carry on and speeding through, especially the settlement areas. And that's the concerns I have, is in those areas where there's a lot of kids out there playing and whatnot. So I think this might be a good idea, but as Councillor Jaworski said, it's a good tool for our toolbox. I don't know if anyone wants to move forward with this, so late in the year for our last term, but it's a good idea to after if you do a study on this, to see if it's worthy or not.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Warden. I mean, it's a difficult thing. It's a great tool, and probably as difficult it is to support, anticipating that I will probably privately fund this situation. But it is certainly a worthwhile tool, but it is also $12,000 a month if it goes every single day. It's not a cheap tool. And there are I'm not necessarily speaking against it, but we have certainly had spots where we have had multiple complaints, and the complaints of people are valid, but they're also just complaints of people. So people's ability to actually accurately identify how fast the vehicle is going tends to be less than accurate. The cars are going too fast. We've gone to Bend, we've gone to other places and gotten those signs put up, and then not just an opinion, the data tends to say it's way less than what people think it is. Now, if we're paying $450 a day for that sign to be there, I don't think it's a revenue generator. I think it's a cost, but it's balancing out whether the cost is actually educating the public or not. It could be quite expensive. Is there a short term to this, Ben? Could we enact it on a Thursday and then say Sunday we don't want it anymore? Like, are we tied into a contract for a long time? Or because it's compared to, as Councillor Jaworski said, compared to $10 million, it's nothing. But $144,000 a year to maybe prove people wrong or is expensive.
So you are tied into a contract, and I'm in this. We're looking at what I would consider to be the worst case price, because as you add cameras on, your joint processing costs actually go down a little bit. So there, but then of course you have, if you don't. Yeah. So it's always like that balance. You got to work out the balance of the right number to kind of what makes sense. But again, in a perfect world, everybody stops speeding in these areas, and it's still a cost for us. So.
Councillor Wirt, then Councillor Fraser.
Through you, Madam Warden, I guess my comment is that I think we're early in the game here, and my recommendation would be that we use our internal expertise to come up with a position as a recommendation and then bring it back to council. But there's an opportunity for this technology to evolve, and Toronto doesn't have to be the only area that we can source this kind of tech from as a support mechanism. And I'm always intrigued whenever I hear how this is coming, because I'm old enough to remember whenever this became a charter challenge and they threw it out, and now we're back. So is that accurate? Like, this is because Rebecca's sitting over there in fear, because I'm going to say that this is how we're going to sort out the cross-border issue, is that we can put them on the 401 and really create a revenue stream. But my comment would be that we use our in-house expertise in conjunction with the OPP and come up with a recommendation that could be forwarded to the next council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wirt. Councillor Fraser?
Thank you, Madam Warden. A question for Mr. DeHaan. Maybe it's too early in this investigation, but how frequently can they be moved? And is it internal staff that moves the cameras and signs? That'd be my first question.
So the municipality determines the frequency of how it gets moved, but it's done by the company that you're renting the technology from.
So each move would incur a cost then?
Okay. Councillor McGillis, just 1 second.
If I may.
Okay, sorry.
So I just wanted to comment to, I just needed that in my mind, but I do want to comment about the overall cost as Councillor Armstrong talks about $144,000 a year. I think we need to consider this further, and more investigation in maybe 2023 in my mind is a better thought, but there's other traffic control measures, mitigation measures that can be put in place, and I know we've had some installed locally in North Dundas around the new project at Winchester Public School to control speed that are permanent. It's a capital cost, and it's you pay it once and you're done with it. So I think there's other measures that could be considered rather than this, to Councillor Landry's thought, this extremely it's black or white. You're right or you're wrong. Thank you, Madam Warden.
Okay, you're welcome. Councillor McGillis has said that his question was covered. I just have a quick question, then we'll see if we can get this wrapped up. So when a county road goes through a hamlet, it would be the county that would be responsible for, if a request was made on behalf of the municipality to cover the main street, it would be the county that would be paying for it.
Yeah, I see this. You know, if it's a county road that we're working on, I absolutely see that it would be a county expense.
Thank you. So maybe just with a show of hands, who would like to see this sort of ongoing behind-the-scenes work on this issue, that it come back in 2023? Or who? Or I'm going to ask the two questions. Or who would like to see this as an immediate priority? So let's ask the question first. Who would like to see this come back to the next council? That's 4. I'm 5. And who, immediate priority? 1, 2, 3. Okay, it's coming back to the next council. All right, thank you for that. 11.3, Friends of the Summerstown Forest, request for fire pit and shed.
Thank you. A little bit of a softer topic, I'll say. So we've had a request from the Friends of the Summerstown Forest. They've got two, certainly the warming hut that's being requested to replace. There's an existing, we'll call it a temporary structure at the end of, if you kind of go down it's Trail A, the main trail, there's a little seating area there. They're actually looking to create something a little bit more user-friendly, let's say, and actually, so it's a temporary warming hut. It's just a shed that they're proposing to replace that structure with. So they've asked SDG to consider permitting that. The second thing is that they have received some funds to create a warming hut, and I give in the staff report just a little rendering of what that could look like. That was sent to me again by the Friends, and they'd like to put that kind of further in where right now where there's essentially the muster area before you go onto the trail. So it's out of the parking lot, down the main trail, just that first little bit where the old parking lot used to exist, and that would provide an area for the volunteers to warm themselves as they, I don't know if you've been out there this winter, but every time I've gone, there's a volunteer that's standing out in the bitterest of cold weather, helping people as to which way to go and where to be. So help not only their volunteers, but people that are going and enjoying lessons or are going together as a family before they go back to the parking lot or before they start on the trail as a spot to warm up. So we, just for council's input, or sorry, not input, but rather information, we do have a memorandum of understanding with the Friends. That does expire this year. We do anticipate, well, we will renew it. We do have to come back and renew it. One thing that I certainly want to look into further before we get to that point is we do want to get into our forest use policy that I know I've talked to council about, and council has approved funding to have some staff help for hiring a staff support person to help with the forestry initiatives and whatnot. So I think it's an important exercise that we go through to get through that forest use policy in advance of renewing that memorandum of understanding. And I think, again, this has been a great relationship. But this is the time of year, of course, when the Friends do want to start working on their future plans. And before we get to that point, I just wanted to confirm with council that they're comfortable with what's being proposed from staff's perspective and from talking with South Nation Forester, who we use as contracted services to help with these things. We don't see an issue, but again, I want to cross my T's and dot my I's before we give any permission to go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Questions or comments? Go ahead, Councillor Warden.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Warden. Residents continue to see the benefits of these guys working really hard to improve the forest, so I certainly hope that we can get that done and allow them to do this.
Okay, anybody else? Everyone seems to think that's a good idea. Very good. Okay, I think you have your direction. On to Roads Rationalization Policy Framework.
So I think this is exciting, but I'm not gonna pretend that everybody would agree with me on this one. So you may recall, so we do have direction from council to work through a roads rationalization this year, and this is part of that work plan that I've previously presented to you. Is coming back at the March meeting with a draft framework. So what I want to do is just kind of go through it with council at a very high level. The report, I think, kind of presents it well, and I'm looking for feedback with the intention, if there is some, I guess, some detailed feedback that requires further analysis and discussion, I'll have till April to do that, and then come back in April with kind of, we'll call it the final draft. And really, again, this is what we're working on right now. Is we're in number 1 right now. Once we've finalized it, we come back again April, and then from there review Finch Roxborough Boundary Road, share the findings with council, and then return back to this policy after that we've gone through an exercise with one roadway to see what works, what didn't work, what we're happy with, what we're not happy with, and then we can kind of hammer down the policy and then go through the complete review. And that's something, again, council has agreed to this process, so I want to just remind and make sure we're on the right track with this. So what I'm suggesting in this draft policy is we have a bunch of criteria that we'd look at for each roadway, and we've assigned a weight to each of those criteria. And our intention with this is that once we've gone through a road, looked at all the different categories, you know, why we would consider it a county road. So for example, if it met criteria 1 and 3, we'd give it points based on that. And then at the end of the day, once we've gone through the entire exercise, if it meets a certain threshold, then it's either weighs towards yes or it weighs towards a no. So that's the whole basis of this. So the criteria that we're considering as part of this review includes we'll call it the settlement area connector criteria with a high weight of 3. And really what we're looking at is roads that connect settlement areas as identified in the OP to each other or to provincial highway network. So again, I would say this is probably the most straightforward of all the criteria that we would consider. Mostly every county road that you can think about that we look after today meets this criteria. So 34, it's going from Lancaster to Green Valley to Alexandria. Those are connecting settlement areas. So, it would meet this criteria and therefore get a score of 3. Provincial highway and county road connector. So what this criteria, so this is criteria number 2, the separate one, with a weight of 2. It's connecting major commercial, industrial, or institutional areas to provincial highways or existing county roads. A great example that I could think of as what would have been considered, or maybe still is considered, a provincial highway / county road connector is County Road 7, Smiths Road. So that connected the Nestle plant to 43 West. So there's an example of a road that would fall under this category. So, these are the kinds of things that we'd have to look at and see if it still connects and works. Boundary area service criteria, and that's providing a service to an adjacent regional road or provincial road. When we look at County Road 18 in South Glengarry, it's connecting to Highway 340 in the province of Quebec. So there's an example of a piece of roadway that actually makes sense to be considered a boundary area service. Heavy industrial service, or an EDR, so that's a road that's providing an EDR or is actually providing a service with, that's generating major heavy vehicles, so in quarry areas, things like that, that would receive a weight of 1. A barrier service, so that's a road that's providing service parallel to or across major barriers to free movement of traffic. So Highway 401 is a great example where there's a barrier and we have to get across it. So you're funneling roads to a road to be able to cross this barrier. So any road really that has an overpass over the 401 would likely qualify as a barrier service road. Resort tourism service, so these are roads that are providing a kind of a network level service within 4 kilometers of a major resort or recreational area, and that's quantified by 500 trips a day when it's in operation. So, Upper Canada Road, County Road 41, coming off the 401, going to Upper Canada Village, could it meet this criteria? Probably, because it is there's a lot of traffic that's generated by that, and it's funneling that traffic to that major tourism generator. Urban arterial extension. So this is a road that's coming out of an urban area and connecting to county roads or provincial highways. County Road 42, which is McConnell Road in the city of Cornwall comes out of the city and then goes north to County Road 44. So 42 would fit the criteria of an urban arterial extension. Traffic speed. So we do want to give some weight to those roads that have high posted traffic or higher speed limits. Again, county road system, just stepping back, it's always about efficiency and trying to connect goods and services and people as efficiently as possible. So where we have speed limits of 80 kilometers per hour, it would meet a criteria for traffic speed. Similarly, road surface, so we're looking for asphalt surfaces. Again, that's just a higher quality surface that allows higher traffic volumes and weights and longer service life, so we would give those a higher weight. Volumes, so the number of vehicles per day, we're suggesting a weight of half here, and that's really to identify roads that have high volumes where a traffic count is greater than 1,000 vehicles per day. Right-of-way, similar to what I've just mentioned, is another criteria we would look at, has a weight of 1, so roads that have a 26-meter right-of-way, which is the county minimum standard for right-of-way width in a rural area, and 20-meter right-of-way in urban areas. Main Street criteria, so this is a road that's providing an uninterrupted continuation of a county road through a settlement area where an acceptable bypass is not available. So again, just connecting county road to county road through an urban area. And those are the criteria we'd look at. And then to get to our final scores, what we'd do is before any of these things are actually studied, we'd create a working group, and I'm suggesting that gets approved by council. The council approves what roads are being reviewed, so we actually solicit feedback from local municipalities, and we look at our system ourselves, figure out what roads we want to review, come back, make sure council approves those. If we're looking at traffic counts, we want to make sure traffic counts are relatively current. We're scoring in that working group on a consensus basis, and in the event we can't actually come to a consensus on something, we agree we go to a neutral third party to make a determination. Once we've gone through that process, so we're essentially tallying scores at that point. Anything that scores, again, less than a 6, and this is, we've looked at it at a very high level, and this is why we have to almost go through a roadway to see how this all works. Less than a 6 doesn't serve a regional purpose and should not be considered county road. Between 6 and 8, we'll call it borderline, so it may be considered a county road, and scoring greater than 8 is definitely serving a regional purpose and should be considered a county road. And then after those scores are tallied, we come back to county council and discuss the findings. So that's what's proposed in the policy. Hope it made a little bit of sense, and if there's any questions, happy to answer it.
Thank you for your report, Ben. I'm glad you explained some of those. Do we have any questions or comments? Go ahead, Councillor Ward.
Yeah, through you, Madam Warden. It's a good report. I think it's pretty concise. The only area that I would have a concern is that in the second item, when we talk about the types of traffic, does that include ag? Is that what you consider commercial?
Yeah, well, I think our traffic counters would pick up. If a traffic counter is out, it would pick up agricultural equipment moving across it. I'm not sure how it would actually, I don't know if it would classify it correctly, so that maybe stepping back a little bit, when we do our traffic counting, you'll see there's 2 tubes that go out, and the counter is smart enough to know based on when axle 1 hits the first tube and axle 1 hits the tube number 2, what kind of traffic it is, so it can actually classify it like passenger vehicle, motorcycle, transport, B-train, like I actually can figure all that thing out just based on this, as long as we've spaced them correctly. So what I'm trying to say is, I'm not sure it catches agricultural, but it'll catch it as a count. It might put it in the wrong classification. So it is included, yeah.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Yes.
Sorry, and one last, I should say, this is not just Benjamin DeHaan making up a lot of these criteria. This is kind of literature that's out there. So if you're wondering how I got so creative, I don't want that credit. It is like through Ontario Good Roads and county engineers groups, these kinds of things exist.
So you stole that information then?
Yeah, the weighting is new. That is something that we've made up, makes it sound willy-nilly, but that's something we've assigned to it to actually kind of give it a way to sort it out, but the criteria exists.
Okay, Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, was it 2000, Ben, the last time the our DJ did that? Yeah, so it's been over 20 years. Okay.
And Ben, you say that this will definitely need to be adjusted as time goes.
Yeah, and you know, a great example is like, did we assign enough? I think traffic volume. You know, we assigned a weight of half, and you know, why did we assign a weight of half? Like, I think there's a good debate we can have about whether the weighting is correct at some point, and that's why. You know, again, I want to reiterate, I don't think council should approve this policy. I think we should keep it in draft form until we really kind of go through an exercise and say, yeah, this is working, this isn't working, like, and see how it kind of shakes out a little bit further.
Okay, so is everybody good with that? Then we'll keep it in draft policy, and Ben will keep us updated. Very good. Thank you. And the last item is equipment purchases.
Thank you. The first thing I wanted to just bring to council's attention, what we're proposing to do is go out to tender for our 2023 plow. Usually we'll ask this, or we'll bring it to council's attention in the fall and award it before budget's approved. So you may recall we awarded our 2022 plow in November of last year, expecting that plow would get delivered just before winter. What I'd like to do, just based on delivery times, is shift that whole paradigm and start tendering in the spring for the following year's plow, so that our plows are getting delivered kind of early summer is what I think it'll end up being, which is great because it actually gets through the peak time when people are buying plows, and I think overall it's just going to work a lot smoother for us. So I wanted to bring that to council's attention in case there's any concerns with us. You know, you're going to hear from me in a month from now saying we're awarding our plow tender for 2023, and I just don't want people to be like, what the heck is going on? So that's why. So that was number one. And number two is just, you know, we've had a lot of good discussion, and even today it comes up about some of the COVID relief funding that we have and ways to efficiently use it. One idea that's come to mind, and again, I wanted to bring this to council's attention because we had intended to do an equipment replacement schedule update this summer, really in anticipation for budget next year, so that we can kind of give council, the new council or this council, you know, a good forecast for the next 10 years. One thing that I see as an opportunity for us is to use some of that COVID relief funding to offset some equipment purchases, and in particular I'm talking about pickup trucks, just to expand the fleet. And you know, in the event we do have to get back to, it seems funny to talk about it today now that we're allowed to get a little bit closer, but in the event that we do have to provide physical distancing again. And it also, you know, the double side of that, it's an efficient way to use that funding, and if we work ahead a little bit in our equipment replacement plan and provide some budget relief in years coming forward. So I wanted to throw that out to council to see if that's something that you'd feel comfortable with us doing. So I'm talking about, you know, in the very near future, tendering and buying pickup trucks that might be have only been thought of in 2023 and 2024. So we buy them early. We've got the money to use that. We don't have to actually expend that money in budget seasons coming up. And we get to use some of that relief funding that we have. And so, you know, dual purpose is we have that capacity, and we've also saved taxpayer money moving forward.
Very good, thanks. Go ahead, Councillor Warden, then Councillor McDonald.
Through you, Madam Warden. Ben, good report. I think that's great about the plows. You got to get ahead of the game. Where are we at in regards to electrification of our fleet and potentially buying hybrid vehicles? As you all know, the price of fuel went up quite a bit this last little while. So where are we with that? And I believe by 2025, there's going to be all three major North American manufacturers will have a complete electric vehicle in the truck category. So where are we with that? Excuse me.
Yeah, and I will say that I'm a big fan of electric pickup trucks, particularly in I think we have the perfect setup for electric pickup trucks because we have a base every night. We've got good electrical service at all of our shops, and it's the perfect scenario. I think the market's not there yet. From what I'm understanding, you go out to tender for or try and purchase electric or hybrid truck, you're talking a year to 2 years before you get it. So that to me is the only impediment right now, or I'd be saying like we're looking at all electric trucks at this point. So you know, I guess the unfortunate downside to what I'm suggesting is that it might only be in 2 to 3 years from now when we're actually, you know, back into purchasing pickup trucks. But maybe the good side is that by then the market's caught up, and then this might be the last kind of big purchase of gas pickups we need to do for the next little while. So, you know, I guess it's, you know, the caution of this is well noted. That.
Okay, Councillor McDonald.
Just my question is, if we purchase a bunch of trucks in the, you know, in this next year and a half, how long do trucks generally last? And are we going to be, will a council in 5 years be faced with replacing 6 vehicles that we purchased in 1 year?
Yeah, and it's a great point, because it's kind of counter to an asset management plan, as you're astutely pointing out. We're selling our pickup trucks at, you know, 500,000 kilometers is probably the minimum we sell them at, and usually it's 500 to 750,000. So we get really good life out of our pickup trucks. We do a good job keeping them on the road. So what I see is that we'll have to, depending on how it all shakes out, we'll have to plan ahead for that exact wave. So it might be that we're selling more at the 500,000 just to get it in the replacement and smooth out the wave, because it does, to your point, it will create a peak that we have to deal with in the future.
And just a follow-up question, Madam Warden. I mean, everybody drives by all the yards for the car lots, and there's very few product. So do you see this as even reasonable? And are we going to overpay at this point because there's nothing on the lots?
That's the risk. That is the risk, that we're overpaying, or just there's no capacity there. Hopefully by bulk purchase, we actually become a preferred, you know, maybe we jump to the front of the line, but it is a risk for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor McGillis.
Thank you. Have you looked at purchasing maybe not the half-ton, but the smaller pickup trucks? And because they're easier on fuel or gas, whatever you get. And another thing too, hybrid. If you looked into that, is there pickup trucks now that are easier accessible to buy hybrid trucks, so that in the event that we do convert to electric, we'll be able to sell them maybe a lot easier and with more money?
So the first question with respect to the smaller pickup trucks, the why we like, and I'm going to call it a full-size pickup, is the versatility that we get from it, so that it can go from, you know, this application to this application to this application. So I know we have had we'll call it like an S10, like a smaller truck in the past, and we found it was you almost pigeonholed it to a certain role, and it lost its versatility compared to a regular pickup truck. So I'm hesitant to look at that, and I also know, I used to drive a Ford Ranger. This is some years ago. And then when I went to a full-size pickup truck, I actually was doing better with fuel mileage. And I'm not suggesting that's the way it is today, but I know there's a lot of different technology that's employed in the full-size pickup trucks today that are just gasoline engines, you know, shutting down cylinders to try and improve their fuel efficiency. So I'm not suggesting that you wouldn't get better mileage, but I think the full-size have done a lot better in kind of improving. So that's part one of the question. Part two was about hybrid. From my understanding, Ford is the only one that's offering a hybrid option right now. So, and I could be wrong, but that's my understanding. Like in every trim level, and there might be some that offer it in a higher trim level if it's Chev or whatever it might be. But we also have to be, you know, when we're preparing a pickup truck tender, we try and find like a base trim level that everybody can bid on. So that's also been another challenge of ours, is trying to compare apples to apples. So if we get into very specific, you know, we'll call it like a fleet level trim, but hybrid option, there may be, you know, for example, and I don't know if this is true or not, but maybe GMC is like, well, I can only offer the platinum level at a hybrid, so they can't compete on a dollar for dollar basis. So it gets a little bit challenging when everybody's not at the same level. So we do a lot of work to try and bring all the trucks into a comparative class.
Okay, thank you for that, Ben. Councillor Landry.
Just one more quick question. So to Councillor McDonald's comment, so we have the funds. I can see where you do I'm not sure how many we're talking here that you're looking at. I know it's just being proposed, but you don't want to get caught, whether it's 5 years or 8 years, where now all of a sudden you're looking at buying and you're tying the hands of future council terms. But maybe Rebecca can get that answer for us. What is there a timeline for spending of this COVID? It appears that every meeting there's something that comes up that we're getting, the light comes on, and we could potentially use it versus, like just again today with the long-term care homes and taking that money from COVID. Is there a timeline that we have to utilize it by? Oh, let's buy some trucks.
But, so it doesn't sound like there's any, serious objection to this, so as long as it doesn't permanently inflate the size of the fleet, then I think we're good to go. Thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Councillor Warden.
That one last point, I think if there's such a short timeline with the funds, I think you should explore purchasing used equipment as well if you're not able to buy new, because if these funds dry up at the end of the year, I think that should be an avenue that should be considered, because the market is tight for availability on all that stuff.
Okay, and Councillor McDonald.
I just want to, if anybody thinks that the government's coming back after us to get that COVID money, I think you're sadly mistaken. This money it's in our bank accounts. They are not coming to claw it back. There's no way. So, and I'll look at the camera and say it, there's no way they're coming to get that money. So.
Okie dokie, so there's a guarantee for you. Okay, thank you. All right, so we don't have any closed session today, do we? No, so that is officially almost the end of our meeting. Madam Clerk, if you could please read the ratification bylaw.
It's moved by Councillor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor McGillis, that bylaw number 5346, being a bylaw to adopt, confirm, and ratify matters dealt with by resolution, be read and passed in open council, signed and sealed.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion? Carried. And the adjournment resolution, please.
It's moved by Councillor Smith, seconded by Councillor McDonald, that council adjourn to the call of the chair.
All in favor of the motion? Thank you. Carried. Thank you, everybody. Good to see everybody back in normal setting. Have a great rest of the week.